Committee meeting for the City of McMinnville to order for 2021. Claudia, would you please do the roll call of the Budget Committee members and City Council?
Committee Member Haas.
Present.
Councillor Garvin.
Here.
Committee Member Hart.
Here.
Councillor Geary.
Here.
Committee Member Hofstetter.
Here.
Councillor Chenoweth.
Present.
Committee Member Sealer.
Here.
Councillor Peralta.
Here.
Committee Member Phoenix.
Here.
Council President Drapkin.
Here.
Council Member Harmon Ferry.
Here.
Committee Member Maxfield.
Here.
Mayor Hill.
Here.
And Chair Minke.
Here. Okay, so initially what we're going to do is elect a budget chairperson. Amanda, would you like to explain this process for us, please? Our city attorney.
Yes, thank you. I'm going to just go over an explanation of how the process for the election of the chair will work. It might be a little bit different than what you all have done in the past, so just so everyone's on the same page. We're going to begin with the nominations for the position of the chair. Any committee member may nominate another member, and committee members can also nominate themselves. Nominations do not have to be seconded. If a nominee does not wish to be considered, that person can decline the nomination. When nominations stop, the chair will call for any more nominations. When no other nominations are forthcoming, the chair will state the nominations are closed. Once the nominations are closed, the chair will state the names of the nominees. Each member must state their vote for the chair. If one person receives a majority of the vote, the chair will declare the result of the vote. If no one receives a majority of the vote will be done again. No person can be eliminated as a nominee, but any nominee can withdraw their nomination. The voting will continue until one person receives a majority of the vote. At the close of the election, the new chair will preside over the remainder of the Budget Committee meeting.
Thank you, Amanda. So I'm calling for nominations for the chair of the City of McMinnville Budget Committee. Do we have nominations?
I would like to nominate Kelly Minke as the chair for the Budget Committee for this fiscal year.
Okay, any further nominations? Okay, it appears nominations are closed. Nominees for the chair are Kelly Minke. City Recorder, will you now conduct a roll call vote of the City of McMinnville Budget Committee for the election of the chair, please?
Committee Member Haas.
I vote for Kelly.
Councillor Garvin. Committee Member Hart.
Yes.
Councillor Geary.
Yay to Menke.
Committee Member Hofstetter.
Yes.
Councillor Chenoweth.
This is a really rough decision. I think I'll vote for Kelly Minke.
Committee Member Sealer.
I vote for Kelly.
Councillor Peralta.
Aye.
Committee Member Phoenix.
Vote for Kelly.
Committee Member Harmon Ferry.
Vote for Kelly.
Council President Drapkin.
And vote for Kelly Minke.
Committee Member Maxfield.
I vote for Kelly Minke.
Mayor Hill.
Yes.
And Chair Minke.
I vote for Kelly Minke. Okay. So the vote is unanimous. I believe it's 14 for me. Am I correct?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Cool. All right. So we now move on to the approval of the May 18th, 2020 Budget Committee minutes. And I need a motion to approve those minutes. Have all looked at them or familiar with them?
I move the approval of the 2020 Budget Committee meeting minutes from May.
Sal made the motion. Do I have a second?
I second.
Meredith? I'm sorry, who seconded?
Cherry.
Oh, Cherry. Thank you, Cherry. Okay. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
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 Any opposed, saying nay? It appears that passes unanimously by 14 votes. Okay, thank you very much. So it is now time for the presentation of the proposed budget and budget committee message by our city manager, Jeff Towery. Please, Jeff, give us your message. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Chair Menke, Mayor, members of the council, members of the lay members of the budget committee, city staff, and public who are in attendance. Tonight's presentation of the budget will take a slightly different form than we have done in years past. I do have a series of slides. There'll be an opportunity for questions about the initial presentation after my remarks. Many of my remarks will seem familiar, perhaps a little bit repetitive to the Budget Committee. Much of the information that I'm presenting tonight is for the public record and is information that is already presented to you in the budget. I'll be embellishing in some cases as well. We lost John Lewis this year, and it was a challenging budget process for the staff up until now, and may well be a challenging process as we continue to work through it. This quote seemed to me to capture at least a sense of the times, and if not the times, certainly a reflection of Congressman Lewis's perspective on life. So, as we all know, we're a year plus into the COVID-19 pandemic. We have been creative and innovative as we have tried to deliver services to the community over the last year and a couple of months. We can talk specifically about those as we work our way through some of the budget presentation at the department level. I will just say that I am incredibly proud of the team assembled here at the City of McMinnville, and that includes every employee and every key volunteer who works for us. People have worked really hard through frustrating and challenging circumstances. Some of those persist to this day and for some period of time, but want to express my gratitude, and I will probably do that multiple times this evening. Initially, when we prepared the general fund, the entire budget, but looking at the general fund gap in particular, our goal was to start with about a month. What we started the current year with was about a 1 month reserve, but the gap for the budget as initially proposed was about $3.5 million. I want to tell you that typically at the beginning of the budget process there is a gap, and it's driven by a number of things. One is that we typically start putting together the budget in some departments as early as December, but in earnest in January and February. We are often working with expense and revenue numbers at that point in the budget that are a couple of months older than that. And we tend to take a pretty conservative approach on both the expense and the revenue sides initially. We also have historically been sort of, I guess, incremental in the way we do our budgets. We typically start with where we were last year. We try to forecast cost increases that have accrued to us or that we anticipate occurring. In some cases, we're looking at added service levels, although in this year's case, that wasn't part of the original calculus. This particular gap was a little bit larger than we typically see initially in the process, but really wasn't that unusual. We saw it as significant. We also viewed it as a short term. The city for several years now has been working towards the possibility of a fire district, which would have the opportunity to create additional long-term financial capacity. And so as we work to really update our revenues and expenses, reassess our requests based on what we historically spend rather than the authority we typically have, we were able to close that gap significantly to about $2 million. One of the reasons that historic spending was used is that we are often, again, conservative at the early point of the budget and presume that we will spend what we have the authority to spend. And the reality is that we seldom do that. We almost always underspend, and in some cases by a significant amount, for a variety of reasons. And so we really wanted to sort of change our focus to historic spending levels rather than historic budgeted levels. We thought that would be both more realistic and a more refined approach to building this particular budget. Our revenues and expenses do not grow at the same rate. This is something that is a 30-year plus historic reality in Oregon for local governments. What we saw this year is that our revenues grew about 3% and our expenses grew about 6.4%. That is fairly typically within the range of growth. And so you can see that we typically have a spread of about 3% a year. If in years where we have a really healthy reserve or significantly growing or new revenue sources, those mitigate this gap in historic revenue growth and expenditure. We have been more lean over the last several years, and we have been spending down the reserve intentionally. And we were subject to significant revenue losses and a number of increased expenses as a result of the pandemic, all of which really combined to make it a more challenging budget year than we have seen in recent years, probably since the recession of 2008. We took a number of actions to close the gap in the general fund. I will say that we often spend most of our time here talking about the general fund, and that is because it is where most of the forward-facing services that the city provides are provided. Police, fire, library, parks maintenance, for instance, are the significant consumers of general fund dollars. That doesn't mean they're the only services that we provide, but it's also the fund that has the most significant gap between ongoing revenue growth and ongoing expenditure growth. We had initial capital requests that are about 2 times the amount we have historically funded, and we made reductions in those requests. We have a number of vacancies in a number of departments and made decisions to hold many of those vacancies open and review all vacancies that occurred in the general fund prior to authorizing filling vacancy. And we evaluate those from both the budget and a service impact, those decisions. We transitioned to essential expenses only for the balance of the fiscal year in some departments, and we implemented a furlough program for non-union positions. We started that program in early April. We anticipate that program to run through the first week of September. I'll talk a little bit in more detail about the furlough program. About 80 employees, including myself, the entire executive team, and most non-union employees will take about 23 unpaid days from the beginning of the furlough program into the first week of September. The average is about 1 a week. This is 20% fewer work days for those employers, and we know there will be and already has been a service impact, mostly in terms of limited access to those employees, delays in response, and delivery of some of our programs and services. Most general fund work groups and the street and building funds have furloughed employees. The street fund saw a similar revenue impact from COVID, and while the building fund has set aside reserves to deal with the fluctuation in development activities, it really is part of the same work group as other general fund employees. So it felt equitable to include the furloughs in that work group. We did not furlough the wastewater utility, which has a robust revenue stream and significant resources. We did pursue, but police and fire unions declined to consider furloughs for the members who work 40 hours per week in those bargaining units. We believe this action will save roughly $650,000. And while we do see a service impact, we felt that this was a prudent way to go. I mentioned earlier, and I'll probably mention a couple of times, that while the gap was significant, we saw it as short term. And I guess when I talk about we talk about the budget team, which includes the executive team and some key budget preparers in all of the departments. What our goal was to present to you a prudent and balanced budget that sustained as many services as we could, and where we made reductions, we wanted the reductions to be as shallow as possible and as short-term as possible, recognizing that there was the likelihood, or at least the possibility, of improved times in the near future. We also were impacted this year by a new and updated and I think modern and appropriate reserve policy that the council adopted last fall. This budget will have reserves that compare favorably to the adopted budget last year. We started this year with about 0.8 of a month, and we'll be almost a 1 month of operating expense. So that's a marginal improvement in the right direction. The council adopted that policy, I think, in October or November of this past year. It sets a general fund target of 2 months of operating expenses being held in reserve, and that's a best practice. The policy sets out a 3 to 5 year build back that allows the city time to make adjustments to resources and spending to be able to reach that target. And so while this year is a tight budget and we are seeing the diminishing of some services, we also take seriously this commitment and this direction from the council to rebuild our reserves. The clicker went to sleep. There we go. This is your annual reminder that we do have a strategic plan. And notwithstanding the fact that this was a challenging budget process, we still relied significantly on the strategic plan to give us guidance. The vision and the mission of the community were established through this process we started probably about 3.5 years ago. It took about a year to work our way through the strategic planning process, and the strategic plan was adopted in the spring of, the winter of 2019, I think a February meeting. We identified the core values of the organization: stewardship, which is being responsible caretakers. We note that there's a significant community pride in McMinnville. Equity, we're compassionate and welcoming. We respect different points of view. We want to make sure that we're providing equitable access to services and the ability to participate in the public process. We also identified courage, believing that we are future-oriented and trying to be proactive about planning for the community. And we think we need to be held accountable, and civil discourse and responsive service and clear and useful information is part of that. We try to measure what we do and how we do it against these values every day, every week, every month. And we don't always hit the mark. Aren't always happy with the mark when we do hit it, but we continue to test against these values and will continue to do so. We identified a series of strategic priorities for the life of the plan over 15 years, or a couple of years into it. City government capacity, civic leadership, community safety and resiliency, economic prosperity, engagement and inclusion, growth and development character, and housing opportunities. A part of the calculus for this year's budget was knowing that we would receive federal funds from the American Rescue Plan Act of 2021. I will tell you that we still don't know how much we're going to receive. The Treasury Department has not yet certified the amounts that communities the size of McMinnville will receive. We understand that we may see that number as early as Friday of this week. Right now, we are relying on published numbers, which target about $7 million in general fund to help address the negative impacts of the pandemic. The funds can be used to support general operations, to stabilize reserves, and initiate or complete key projects. They are one-time dollars, and we need to be strategic and prudent about how we spend those dollars. we have time to spend the dollars as well. The funds have to be obligated by December 31st of 2024 and have to be fully spent by December 31st of 2026. So we can take a long-term view on some of these funds. We've got a one-pager that Jennifer, our finance director, put together that you have received separately, and it talks about what we suggest as a process moving forward. We're talking about this tonight to sort of acknowledge that this money is out there and to lay the groundwork, but because there are still details like the rules about how we can spend the money and how we report the money that have not yet been determined. In fact, the draft of the rules was published in the Federal Register just Monday of this week and is open for comment into July. So we will have the first payment in our hands before the rules about how to spend and how to report the dollars are final. We also put together a graphic that's maybe a little bit easier to read for folks, and these are really the key steps that we think are prudent for us to pursue as a community, as an organization, when we set priorities and make decisions about spending these funds. It's my suggestion that we continue to rely not just on the council, but on the lay members of the budget committee to help guide this process and to help make decisions, that we make sure that we engage the community, key stakeholders and partners in decisions, and that we really can figure out a way to make a positive impact on the community, recognizing that both this organization and the people who live and work and visit here have been negatively impacted by the pandemic. We've also talked a little bit about revenue. We've shared a fair amount of information and resources with you just recently. The City Council 2 years ago added an action priority to the strategic plan to right-size services, to address insufficient resources by finding new sustainable funding sources, and to look for ways to bring additional revenue into the general fund. And we have done some of those things over the last couple of years. This body approved a budget 2 years ago that included a new wastewater franchise fee. The city has pursued a variety of grants and other sources to help fund one-time or in some cases recurring projects and costs. We have also presented some information to the council and the budget committee for future consideration. We think that that is a longer term conversation that needs to be had with the community, and we didn't try to push new revenue into this budget given the time constraints of our budget process and the challenge of having a really robust community engagement process. Pardon me. I will tell you that the work that has gone into this effort is significant, and we stand ready to work with the council and budget committee and other partners and stakeholders as we continue to have this conversation over the next several months. We think that that thoughtful policy approach, including some real specific research, analysis, and engagement prior to implementing a new revenue, is important to us. And is consistent with the organization's values. And so we presented this balanced budget to you for your consideration tonight without specific revenue, without specific recommendations for new revenue sources. I will tell you that the changes that most will perceive as negative in this year's budget with respect to furlough and holding positions open where we have seen direct service impacts, as well as further delaying important investments in our capital facilities, was not done lightly by the executive team and the budget team. It wasn't done with any sense of joy or particular sense of accomplishment, other than we knew we had an obligation to present to you a responsible and balanced budget. The systemic imbalance between revenue and expenses is ours to fix. It was not ours. It wasn't our creation here locally. It was a statewide series of initiatives in the early 90s. I'm not going to bore you with all the gory details. At least I won't take up the time of the meeting to do that. But I've got a lovely little soapbox speech that I can give at the drop of a hat if you'd like. But I will say that we have to do some things locally to try to remedy that. And we are at a point after 30 years of doing our best where we have to make hard decisions. And those hard decisions will either be long-term and significant negative impacts to municipal services, or the prospect of additional revenues to sustain and grow services as they're demanded by the community. So while we're not happy with the budget we presented to you, and we're not asking you to be happy with it, we are satisfied that it was thoughtful and intentional and done in a really collaborative fashion with a broad swath of employees. I try not to speak for the executive team because it's 12 talented and responsible and respectful individuals. I do believe that the entire budget, the entire executive team does stand behind the budget that we've presented. I think we would all like to see a different budget presented. We would all like to do more than we're able to do with the resources we have in hand this year. With that, I will close with this quote from Amanda Gorman. I think there's opportunity for light. I think this speaks directly to the value of courage and how we can apply that value, not just in the work that we do here tonight, but in the work that we do every day on behalf of the people who live, work, and visit in the city of McMinnville. I'd be happy to answer any initial questions that you have about this presentation. This is not the time to dive into review of the budget. We have an opportunity for some public hearing and public comment before we do that. But if you've got any specific questions about my initial presentation, I'd be happy to take them now.
Jeff, can I make a comment?
You have to talk to the chair, Mr. Mayor.
Chair, can I make a comment?
Yes, Mayor Scott Hill, please feel free to make a comment.
I just want to thank the team for putting together this, again, hard and fine work. I mean, we will have much discussion this evening. In talking to a number of the members of the budget committee, there has been a concern that we don't get the document early enough to really give the time and effort that we need to have to do that. And this year, you got it out earlier. It gave us probably a week and a half more. And I am so appreciative of Jennifer's ask to the budget committee to submit questions early on, and then that masterful 11-page document that went into questions that I think we all had and were answered thoroughly, and it really helped me navigate the process of tonight. And so again, Jennifer and staff, thank you for those answers, because I think it will tighten the process tonight, because I think some hard, penetrating questions have been addressed and answered, and then giving us more time to be prepared. So all the way around, thank you for a budget document that was readable and will be the foundation for a good discussion this evening. Thank you.
Thank you, Scott. At this point in time, I do want to thank Jennifer
Any other questions?
for her excellent work here. But I do have a procedural thing that has to happen at this point. Do any counselors or committee members of the budget committee need to disclose anything? Is there anyone here that would need to disclose something? And I apologize, I don't have
Chair
something.
Minke, Councilor Geary has his hand up.
Councilor Gary, would you like to speak and tell us?
Oh, thank you. Yeah, as per usual, out of an abundance of caution, I should remind everyone that my lovely wife, Samantha, works for the library as the children's librarian. So I don't think that'll harm my ability to weigh in on this budget, though.
Thank you very much, Councilor Gary. We appreciate it. Anyone else?
Appears no other hands.
Okay, I don't see any other either. Okay, so in that case, we have done that procedural thing. So we are now moving to public testimony. Is there anyone in the audience that would like to share testimony on the proposed budget? And again, I'm going to need some help here.
Chair Minke, we'll start with Mark Davis, who signed up, and he's on Zoom, so we can go ahead and unmute his mic and video.
Thank you very much. Mark? Can you hear me, Mark? Oh, there you
Yes.
are. Good.
I was just getting unmuted and my video on. Thank you, Chair Menke and members of the Budget Committee. I've been doing this for several years, making comments. A lot of times I go through some line items for you, but this year I'm actually perplexed about a number of things. And I want to kind of talk about the process in general. I mean, I think realistically we've heard the city manager's presentation, and I think that, you know, the executive team has made a good faith effort to come up with a good budget under the trying circumstances that we're all living under. But I'm still, some things are still not clear to me, and I'm not sure that, you know, this process couldn't be better. So I'm going to raise 3 issues here. Last year when we were at this point in the process, you know, there was a lot of uncertainty. The pandemic had just started, and we had a list of initiatives that we could do later and things, you know, both plus and minus that we were going to take a look at in December. And sure enough, in December, the council held a work session. You know, this is after the tax revenue had come in, and, you know, we were supposed to have a much better idea of where we were standing. And there was a memo in that packet that went out for the work session that was held on December 16th, and I want to read from that. It said, because the general fund is effectively netting to its projected bottom line, staff believes that none of the potential investments or corrective actions should be undertaken in the current year. And, you know, quite frankly, I was rather surprised. You know, I didn't think things were going all that well, but, you know, that's what the numbers showed apparently at that point. Yet, and then we also asked, that wasn't included in that, but it was actually announced at the end of that work session, the $800,000 error from Water and Light was discovered. So we not only had, you know, we basically broken even according to the memo, but we have now had another $800,000 that was going into the general fund. So I'm quite frankly puzzled with less than 4 months later, all of a sudden we're going into a 20% furlough for 80 employees. I mean, what happened in the 3 to 4 month period to cause us to be at what appeared to be a break-even point with more money coming in to suddenly, all of a sudden we have to lay off all these people? I just, you know, I also would have liked to have seen the council weigh in on that possibly. I mean, I understand staff has a right to furlough people, but it seems like it's rather odd that we go through all this line item, you know, business in the budget, and you're weighing in on this and approving it, but suddenly, you know, there goes 20% of the time that people are spending at the library and at planning and, you know, other important things the city's doing, and there's no comments from the city council, and there's no opportunity for the public to say anything about it. I just found that whole, you know, the process between December and when the furloughs happened to be, you know, kind of confusing. I mean, it still doesn't make sense to me. I mean, something was not right somewhere along the way. I mean, it's fine to say, you know, COVID-19, and, you know, we all understand that, but COVID-19 was going on for 9 months when we got to December. So the second thing I want to talk about is the reserve policy. I raised it last year. We were considerably below the council's 25% policy. You had your work session, you talked about it, and you set a new policy of 2 months, basically 17%, 16.67%, which I think is fine. I don't have any problem with that. I think that was you know, it was a good step. But I think that if you look on page 3 of the budget message, you have that explanation of how we're stabilizing the general fund reserves, and you also have a graph. Now, the confusion, I think, here is the graph shows it declining, the red line, which is if we're not doing anything, and it shows 2021 at essentially about 15%. It's not, you know, exact, and showing 21, 22 at 10%. The text says the FY 21-22 estimate for reserves is 0.97 months operating versus 0.80 months last year. So, I mean, we've always been doing this in percentage, and the graphic is in percentage. Now we've switched to months. And so so I go, wait a minute, what is that? Okay, we have a 2-month policy, so that what this means, I believe, is that 0.97 months means that we're aiming for a reserve of 8%, 8.1% exactly. Although I'm not clear on what the 0.80 months for last year, whether last year means last year or the current fiscal year that we're in, but 0.80 is 6.7%. I mean, we have been watching the reserve level go down, 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 you know, for the last several years. I think the city manager mentioned it, that we've been using it, and it's totally appropriate at this time to be dipping into reserves. I mean, this is what reserves are for when there's an emergency, but we were not at our appropriate reserve level when we hit this point. And the statement that this at the end of the stabilized general fund reserve section states, this budget cycle puts us on a path of replenishing and stabilizing our reserve levels, doesn't seem to me to match the reality on the ground. I mean, we have never been below 10% in our reserve level. We're now aiming, we hope, to get to 8% at the end of this year. I just think that something's not right in where we're going here. And the third thing I want to talk about, and probably John Lewis is maybe going to back me up on this, because this is not the appropriate thing to say here, but I'm going to say it anyway. I've raised this before, you know, I'm going to say it again. I do not understand why the city council does not look at financial statements. I really don't. I mean, this is a $100 million operation, and you look at the budget in the spring, and then 6 months after the fiscal year end is over, you look at the audited financial statement. Those are one's on a state of Oregon budget basis, and the other is based on GAAP, so they're not even in the same format. In the interim, you're looking, the only financial information that I see going in the council packet is the cash information report, which is fine, but it's usually several months behind. I mean, at your May 11th meeting, you looked at the January 2021 cash report, and that's not a financial statement. That's like, you know, looking at your bank book and saying how much you got in the bank. It's not telling you, you know, what your balance sheet looks like. So I just really think, I'm a retired accountant, okay? And there's rules for doing financial statements, and that's why you have things that are comparable. In other words, if you're following the rules for creating a financial statement, you have something that's you can look at from month to month to see how you're progressing. When you're doing things, and you know, I don't want to pick on the memo from December, but that December memo had narratives and tables and all sorts of numbers that looked really good, but it wasn't tied to anything that anybody could look and say, okay, this is how we've moved from July to December. It was just, you know, it was numbers, it was information. You really need to have financial statements to be able to tell what's going on. And I know most of the council have business background, and I'm assuming that the budget committee members have some business background. And I mean, do corporations, large corporations, operate without looking at financials? I mean, it's standard to have, you know, quarterly reports with earnings and, you know, all these kind of things. I mean, the city is a big business, and I just really think that you need to be seeing something on at least a quarterly basis to say, okay, these are where our goals are, and this is where we are now. I mean, this is where our reserve level is, instead of just kind of, oh, we got to the end of the year, gee, it went up or it went down, and that's good. And I don't mean this, I want to be clear, this is not a criticism or a suggestion that staff is being dishonest or doing anything wrong. I mean, the reason our system works is because our staff is so good. I mean, that they are the ones that every year, I know they're looking at these numbers, because every year our expenses are less than what the budget is set for. So they're clearly watching out. They're not just willy-nilly spending money and not knowing what's going on. They're looking at the stuff. I just think as the the people, essentially the board of the corporation, the city council should be also looking at the numbers and saying, hey, we're doing fine, or gee, we're not. And what do we need to do to get back on track? So thank you very much. I realize I probably talked too long and got too worked up about that last bit, but that's what I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mark. I really appreciate your remarks at times. So you had some good points tonight. Okay, thank you anyway. Is there anyone else who would like to give public testimony at this time?
Yes, Chair Minke, we have Gretchen Freeman here at Civic Hall.
Okay, Gretchen.
I'd like to thank the chair and the committee for allowing me to make public comment about the budget process. My name is Gretchen Freeman. I'm a resident of McMinnville. I represent Yamhill County on the advisory council for the Chemeketa Regional Library Services Board, and McMinnville is a member of that consortium. My husband and I support library services, both with our dollars and with our time. I'm also a regular swimmer, and I use the aquatic center here in the city. I'd be the first to say I'm not steeped in the budget, the 500-page city budget that was provided, but I did review talking points that were provided to city department heads, and those concerned the recent move to reduce certain department personnel costs by 20%. I know from Parks and Rec that their staffing problem has resulted in the loss of Fridays at the aquatic center. That also added to the loss of Saturdays during the pandemic. So in effect, we've lost a third of our access to the aquatic center. So my questions come from that background. I understand that furloughed non-union employees will work a shortened work week, but they'll receive compensation through state and federal unemployment benefits. The city plans to direct those furloughed salary savings into its reserve fund. It seems to me that the employees are being made whole and the city is a beneficiary of the new arrangement, but city residents have lost access to the aquatic center and other facilities and services due to inadequate staffing. Why not pause the reserve fund policy or use reserve funds during this rainy day instead of banking reserve funds in the middle of forced closures? Secondly, what is causing the city's budget shortfall? As a resident, I have very little information about that shortfall. I do live in an area of McMinnville, Northwest, where there are approximately 200 new homes adding property taxes to the city, and a $7 million anticipated ARPA funding on its way. ARPA funds are intended to stabilize operations and return people to work during the pandemic, not to build up reserve funds, while Parks and Rec and essential services, such as the library, are throttled. Those are my two questions. Thank you for hearing me this evening.
Thank you, Gretchen. I appreciate your comments. Anyone else who has comments this evening? Questions or anything? Okay. Is there anyone in the audience that would like to share testimony on the proposed budget at this time besides the two people that have spoken? Public testimony has been received through the city website on or before May 17, 2021, has been distributed to committee members. All public testimony received prior to the meeting will be added to the public record of the meeting. So we will now close the public testimony. And my next agenda item is a public hearing, possible uses of state revenue sharing, and I believe Mr. Towery is on again.
I am. I'll actually ask Finance Director Jennifer Cuellar-Smith to lead the Budget Committee through this item.
Hi everyone. Jeff, do you mind? Can you put the slide up because it's got the.
That's right. Thanks. Let me get that slide.
Jeff, do I need to read this public hearing right now, or do I read it after we're done?
If you could read that now, Chair Minke, that would be great.
Okay, thank you. I'm sorry, I wasn't sure when. State Revenue Sharing Law, ORS 221.770 requires cities to annually pass on an ordinance or resolution requesting state revenue sharing money. In order to receive state revenue sharing in 2021-2022, a city must have levied property taxes in the preceding year, hold a public hearing before the Budget Committee to discuss possible uses of the funds, and hold a hearing before the City Council on the proposed uses of the funds in relation to the entire budget. I'd like to draw your attention to the city's recommendation for possible uses of the state revenue sharing as included in the city's 2021-22 proposed budget. So I would open the public hearing on do I open it now or wait until after the presentation?
You can open it now, Chair.
Okay. I am opening the public hearing on possible uses of state revenue sharing. If no testimony, okay, so be it. It's open.
Well, so this is Jennifer Cuellar. I'm the finance director, and I'll just say a few words here about to give context. So the this is a state requirement that's been on the books for decades that full service cities need to go through a public hearing process so that the public is aware of the shared revenues that are coming from the state and how they will be applied in terms of use in the upcoming budget year. So the calculation, we estimate the revenue, the revenue sources are listed in detail, line item detail on page 343 of the budget document. So that $456,000 is made up of an estimated $400,000 we expect to get from the state revenue sharing bucket, as well as the $56,000 we are estimating we will receive from state marijuana recreation taxes. And so the distribution this year, in recognition that there are a wide range of services within the general fund that are dependent on unrestricted revenue sources, just a general round number allocation across basic services was provided this year. So that's where the numbers come from, and the reasoning behind this, high level general distribution of costs. So if folks have any questions about that, or if there are members of the public who wish to give comment, that's the close of my remarks.
Okay, does anyone wish to give comment?
Chair Menke, Mark Davis has raised his hand in Zoom.
Okay, great. Mark, would you like to enter your testimony?
Yes, I won't bother with the video. I support this. I would just note that in the past, our revenue sharing has gone to a lot of capital items. I would hope that when we get our American Rescue Funds, or whatever they're called, from the federal government, that we aim them at the things that used to go to the revenue sharing from the state. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for sharing. Anyone else that would like to testify on this? Anyone online?
Does not appear any other hands are raised.
Okie dokie. My apologies. Okay, so the Budget Committee recommendation, okay. Any changes recommended by the Budget Committee will be, review and discussion. Budget Committee and,
Chair Minke, I think you need to close the public hearing now.
Thank you. I close the public hearing at this time. Jennifer, do you have more that you are going to give us more information on?
No, there is no, as Mr. Davis discussed in the past, these revenues have been linked to very particular projects and one-time costs, but given given just the circumstances of the more generalized budget gap year to year, the distribution now is not associated with any particular project. It's just to support the general efforts of these various departments. So if folks have feedback and would like an adjustment or a different approach taken, you know, we absolutely can do that. And then we would bring that forward in the, there's, I believe, another public hearing that will be made about the uses that are proposed coming out of this meeting.
Councilor Geary has his hand raised, Chair Minke.
Thank you. Councilor Geary?
Jeff, thanks for being my handler. This list, I seem to recall it in the past, and I know that it's sort of like I get the exercise, but I feel like I recall a little further definition in years prior, I think to the extent of like library had a little subnote of repair, security, cameras, and things like that. Are there further details for like, if we get this, we will do this, or did I miss those, or?
So the approach we took this year was to step away from the detailed discussion. Your obligation under the state law is to hold a public hearing, and how we spend this discretionary money is really incorporated into the overall budget proposal. Most of our discretionary revenues are not targeted to specific expenses. They're simply distributed to general fund operations, and the details of those planned expenditures are part of the budget documents. So it seemed to us to be repetitive to allocate specific dollar amounts from this revenue source to a particular expense, when that's really detail that's above and beyond the requirements of the statute.
Okay.
Okay, any further questions or testimony? Or, no more testimony, I'm sorry. Okay, so with that, I guess we're going to proceed through the budget document at this point in time. And we're going to start, I think I had some remarks I wanted to preface this with. I do want to state for everyone briefly that this is a draft budget that's put together mainly by Jeff and Jennifer, with a number of meetings with the staff.
You're giving us way too much credit, Chair Minke. There are a lot of hands that touch this information.
No, so. I'm well aware. Basically, I'm saying there has been a tremendous amount of work done to get us to this point. And basically what we folks are, the budget committee tonight, is we're the review team. We're gonna go through this. We've had several weeks now to take looks at it and ask questions. Jennifer's been wonderful about responding to us. And so we have the ability to make comments and some changes if the city has capacity to do them, or the trade-offs, whatever that happen. I just kind of want you to be aware that that's kind of our purpose with this whole document at this time. Okay, so we're going to start with the financial overview. And I'm going to ask everyone, do you have any questions from page 14 through page 32?
Chair Minke?
Yes.
Before we do that, but I've asked this in previous meetings, I was wondering if anybody had any comments just about the process that we have taken for the budget this year. I've heard at least one of my colleagues and maybe some folks in staff encourage perhaps an earlier start with the budget in future years, and that rather than having the budget created by the management team kind of in silo, if we, with different departments, maybe start that process much earlier, as there are oftentimes changes that might be policy changes that might be desirable, but that are difficult to make with the time pressure of an essentially nearly completed draft budget, and then 1 month to make significant changes. So I realized that this is going to be a long meeting, but I wanted to put that out there as a discussion point for consideration.
thoughts on this and city manager? Is this the time to have a dialogue on this?
I think it probably would be. I'm probably the longest standing member of the budget committee, and I don't know whether that's good or bad. I've been through this process many, many times. I would agree. And in my opening statement, I've heard from many of the members of the budget committee and the city council that we need to have the draft budget earlier. A week and a half isn't enough to do that. This year, having almost a month gave at least me much more time to truly go through the document with the time and the effort that would be necessary given all of our busy schedules of work and family and everything else we're doing. So I applaud what we were able to do this year. And again, I don't think we ought to wait for those that want a hard copy. As soon as it's available electronically, I think it needs to, and that's what allowed us to go earlier this year, because we just had the electronic copy. But it was well enough for me to take my iPad and wherever I was on vacation, I was able to work on the budget and formulate the questions that I had. I'll just tell you from my perspective, to address Sal's point of getting much more involved in the process with the departments, I really have a lot of feelings towards that. The department heads, the executive team, and the finance people ought to put together the budget, the draft budget, and we're going to be following the budget with our strategic and our strategic plan, our goals for the year. And I think we've been slow in getting to that, but we just adopted the goals. So I think moving forward, if goals are going to drive the budget, council has given input into that, and then we just make sure that our goals are addressed in the budget. So that's my very quick response to that. Many good points that Sal has, but I think, without having goals for the last 2 years in a very specific direction, I think we're going to, a part of the goals, we're going to have scorecards. And to Mark's point, when he said, having quarterly financial statements, I think that's a great scorecard for the budget preparation and a balanced budget. And I would be 100% behind that, to change that to having a quarterly financial statements brought to the council. I, like Mark, was taken really by surprise in February when we heard a $3 million gap. It didn't make sense to me. And so I think, just like every other board that we sit on, if we're looking at financials on a monthly or quarterly basis, it gives us much more. So again, that's just my thought. It's not the council, it's just Scott Hill.
Yeah, and from my perspective, I would tend to agree with Scott. We have been kind of slow off the mark to get to the point of doing goals and having them ready for the budget. But I think as we go along, this next year, we'll definitely be in that position, and we'll be able to be more forceful with what we want to see.
Well, we've also, Kelly, talked about...
Well, and then the scorecard is what's incredibly important in all this, because that's, and I like you say, I think a financial statement quarterly is an excellent idea.
Well, the other point that has been brought is that we are now going to have our goals run on the fiscal year. Okay, so they're not going to be offsetting. So our goals are going to be tracking with the fiscal year, which I think is going to make it much easier to incorporate goals into the budget process.
Yeah.
Again, Mr. Mayor, if I may, I appreciate that. I definitely agree that we received the budget document earlier, which gave us time to work kind of with what staff is providing. I guess what I was really trying to articulate, and I apologize for not doing a better job of making the point, is that, I've been speaking with other cities and just kind of learning a little bit more about how other similarly situated cities in terms of size and so on handle their budgeting process. And oftentimes it seems like much more of a lengthy process, meaning that, you might, if you're I'm just going to pick a random department. I'll say if you wanted to engage in reforming the courts or reforming the police department because the voters decide that they want to change to decriminalize drugs, for example, drug possession. I feel like that's something that is a conversation that probably takes more than just 3 weeks or 4 weeks and a couple of meetings and a budget document. I mean, I think that's, a lengthy process that you'd want to talk about. And I give that as a case in point, but I think there are others. And so I think what I'm suggesting is that maybe in future years, if we just consider doing more to align the goals that we create to each individual department mission. And I don't know that we got as far along in that regard this year as I would have liked. I'm sure that's your goal, Mayor, but I just want to throw that out there because I don't want to go through another year and not get to that point by the next time we meet in this group.
Well, Sal, thank you for clarifying that it is a part of the goaling process that we need to be a part of. And we may need to get more specific, but we've got to make sure that we keep our priorities in line and not getting so many goals out there that it cripples us in the
city has
process.
to have capacity to do it. My apologies.
But thank you for clarifying that, Sal.
So, Chair Menke, I see that Councilor Peralta has his hand raised. I do have some comments, but certainly would defer to the councilor before it's my turn. I don't know if anybody else is in the queue.
Sal, do you have more comments?
I think he meant Remy, not me.
Yeah, Remy.
Oh, okay, sorry. Councilor Drapkin?
Oh, actually, I think,
Councilor Perry has got his hand up a lot longer,
Yeah.
so I'll defer to him.
Councilor Perry.
Sorry.
I thought it was Perry, but okay, let's do it.
Oh man, that digital bad boy was getting tired. I would echo and agree with Sal, and I also appreciate providing the opportunity at the top to talk about process, because there isn't a process tab in the budget. I think I'll extrapolate on more time is appreciated, and while I appreciated it getting out in April as opposed to later and closer to this meeting, I think let alone from more time, and I know that staff provides the opportunity to, be on the other end of the phone or do the emails and receive all those questions and publish those, which were really great. I think this meeting is when to me it gets started to, the rubber hits the road on the budget and we get in this group and we have the discussion, and that's when the group can move the draft budget to the final budget. I think there needs to be, I think those meetings need to be spread out. I know we have the potential of a second meeting on there. I think that's a little bit of a Potemkin that we have that second date available if needed. I think we should have this over at least 2 or 3 meetings, and that would be a methodical overview and some highlights or something, and then a next meeting be a methodical department by department, or however we want to split those two, and then a third being more of a free-flowing public comment, bring that together and a discussion. I also value sleeping on it after discussions and thinking about things and taking time. I feel like things that warrant taking time are the way we're going to spend the taxpayers $116 million each year, so I think this process should get started earlier and be spread over more evenings strategically, not if available. I also think that we should be involved at the opening. Us and the budget committee should be involved when staff gets together to crack open the budget to create for next year, to ensure that that goal setting is in and goals that we're doing and what we're working on in the strategic plan is implemented from the beginning. So on the subject of process, those are some of my big things, and I'm struggling to support the overall budget until we see some of those things actually enacted and radicalized, or memorialized, not radicalized. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Zach. Councilor Drapkin?
I'll defer to our city manager. Thank you.
So,
Jeff?
so let me say that I value the process that the process desire that you want, and we will design the budget process to serve the needs of the council and the budget committee. I will have to tell you that doing it tonight seems out of order. If you want to redesign the budget process, I think we should spend time talking about it in a series of meetings and work sessions during the summer when we're not putting the budget together. I think it is difficult to contemplate a process re-engineering when you've got the document and you've got a limited amount of time to deal with it. We would be happy to provide more meetings. I will tell you, and I've told you this before and your predecessors, in the course of my career, I have been involved in the production and adoption of more budgets than I have years of service based on sort of odd job transitions. So I've done this a lot. It's like 36 or 37 budgets that I've been involved in. McMinnville's the first place I've ever been where there's a single budget committee meeting. It's an outlier. I've also been in places where it's 12 or 13 budget committee meetings. And I'm not hearing you advocate for 2 months of budget meetings, 3 times a week, although I've seen that happen too. I think we need to work the process so that it's comfortable for this group and allows you to make the sort of policy level decisions that you have the opportunity to make. I would submit to you that tonight is not the time to design that process. See, Member Hart has his hand up. I don't know if anybody else was in the queue first. No.
If no one else is ahead,
I wouldn't mind.
Oh, that Councilor Drabkin did cede her time to me. I'm sorry.
Okay, so who am I going with, Remy?
Councilor Drabkin
I'm gonna go ahead.
and then Member Hart is my suggestion.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah. So I'm going to just reinforce what our city manager just said. I am not opposed to revising the budget process. I think it is timely and appropriate. But I wholeheartly agree that at this stage of the budget process is not the time, nor should we nor should the council itself be the ones who are deciding on what a new budget process should look like. In other words, I feel like even if we're the ultimate decision, if we have option A, B, and C presented to us, then we can move forward from that point. However, I think that staff and the resources that staff have available, if we give clear direction at some point that we would like to see a revised budget process and we have the opportunity to do that, then we can go to staff, let staff do what they are experts in, which is saying, here are some different options of how we could reform our budget process, and then letting us make a decision from that point and go forward. But I think at where we are at this point is late to begin any sort of reformation in the process.
Thank you, Remy. Are you done? Okay, Jerry, what would you like to say?
First, on the procedure, I've been on the budget committee for a number of years now, and it is extraordinarily difficult to adequately deal with a budget this complicated in one session. And I've spoken with other budget committee members, and there's a belief that there's kind of a disincentive to talk, because if you talk, that's going to make this one session even longer. And I don't know about other people, but my brain after a few hours just gets worn out, and it's hard. And I know from lots of years on this committee, by the time we get about halfway through this notebook, people are just staring, and we're just flipping pages as quickly as possible to try to end the meeting. So that's a very, that's problematic. And also, but I don't like, if you get past 3 meetings, I think you're causing other problems. So it's the sweet spot maybe is 2 meetings or 3 meetings. 1 is problematic. Get more than 3 and you have people with lives wanting to move on. And since we're in the, looping back to the financial overview, I always appreciate Mark's comments, and I don't want them to get lost. And this, I think this, for me, this is a good time to talk about it. The December 16 meeting memo, things were rosy. Then you look at this and it starts at a $3.5 million gap, then it goes to a $2 million gap. And I'll just put it out there that I don't understand. And if we could, and Jeff, if you could give us a walk through that, it would be very helpful to me and might raise other questions, or it might make everything else a lot easier.
Yeah, Jerry, I'd be happy to do that. I see that Councilor Chenoweth has his hand raised, and would defer to him if he's got some process comments at this point before I respond.
Councilor Chenoweth, please.
Yeah, I just want to kind of reiterate what's already been said in terms of voicing my support of both what Council President Remy has said and what Councilor Peralta brought forward, and say that please put this as a marker. We do want to reform this process. We do want this discussion later. Obviously, we can't do it right now. We've got enough to cover tonight. But don't let it go by, because I do remember sitting in this process last year, and these same questions were asked, the same concern about process was asked, and nothing happened. So please hear us. We're putting a marker down. We want this reformed. Thank you.
Okay, anyone else before Jeff? And again, I can't see, so, I mean, it's hard for me to tell. If there's no one else, Jeff, would you like to address some remarks?
Sure. We may want to follow up with more complete set of responses. I'm going to turn to Jennifer in a few minutes to add in as well. I would say that it is important to remember that the mid-year check-in was a point-in-time check-in, and we were talking about the budget in the context of the current fiscal year's budget that was adopted, which frankly did not have you on the right path for sustainable finances for the general fund. We also had just maybe 3 weeks before had the council adopt a new policy on reserves, which we had been working on for a while, but we didn't know where that would land. So the trajectory of the current fiscal year's budget was in the wrong direction in the context of the council's plans for reserve policy and desire to see a sustainable long-term balance between revenues and expenses. It still was accurate in terms of our forecasts at the time. So I think that what we could or should have done differently with the benefit of hindsight is we should have talked more about how that particular point in time fit into the larger budget trajectory. Because, from a staff perspective, I will tell you, we didn't think everything was going to be rosy rolling into the creation of this particular budget. I'll also remind people that after that period of time, there was a significant case in the pandemic, and we all found ourselves back in a high risk mode with significantly more cases and more morbidity and more mortality. And we started thinking, well, we don't know how and when this pandemic is going to turn around. In December, we still didn't have vaccines. And so we went through several months as a country where things were a lot worse after December than they were leading into December. We were sort of at the point where we thought maybe things were stabilizing from a pandemic perspective, and in fact, it was going to get a lot worse before it started to get better. So with those sort of high-level initial responses, I will turn it over to Jennifer to see if she's got anything else that she'd like to add, and then we can go back and review Mark's comments and provide to the budget committee afterwards and the council a more robust reflection, if you will.
Yeah, I guess for me, you all, one of the upsides of having a new finance director is that they bring fresh eyes and can I can see trends and that kind of stuff. One of the downsides is I'm still getting the rhythms and norms of McMinnville's finances kind of in my gut. I'm still in that process. So I think part of why we didn't move faster in terms of really looking at the how our FY 2021 budget was going to tee us off or set us up for FY 2022. We could have been doing that earlier. But what the mid-year, it wasn't that we were in a good situation or everything was rosy. It was that we were hitting what the budget plan said we wanted to do for the current fiscal year 2021. And so that's why no actions were contemplated, because we were on plan. The thing was, for me, it was clear that the plan set us up really badly for next year. And so my assumption was everybody else kind of was on that same page, and that was not the case. And so I did not let my concerns hang out in the way that I should have. So I think that's one of the downsides of it was my rookie year, and I was trying to understand how you all roll with these kinds of things. And maybe there was this magical thing that happens in McMinnville that I couldn't exactly see, but and turns out no, the numbers really were real. So this year, that's why I think this year, because for me it's clear that we are not on solid ground financially. We do not have a sustainable financial picture. The current year gap between, and Jeff talked about it in his opening remarks, there's this annual gap, and we don't have, for example, we don't have graphs that we normally produce as a part of our budget document that really show in the year what your current revenues are and current outlays are. And there is this fairly durable gap of $1.5 to $2 million that's existed for years in the general fund. And so that's the sustainability issue that I'm really looking forward to working with members of council, and to the extent that we can ask our budget committee members or other members of the community to help us work through what are other resource opportunities that other communities are utilizing to be able to better serve their constituency with the services that folks need and expect throughout the next 6 months. And we will add a sidebar of making a budget process that also is better serves this group of folks. So I think that's I'll leave it there if anyone has any further questions or comments.
Any other further questions or comments for Jennifer or Jeff? Just off the top of my head, is it feasible to present a financial statement to us on a quarterly basis?
Well, yeah, absolutely, it's feasible. It's just the package doesn't exist. We would have to create it. And that's where I have so many aspirations of, there are things that the governing body needs, and also we aspire to have much more financial and performance information available to people publicly. It's just, we have to build those systems, and that's where it's difficult. And just full disclosure, when there is community process looking at how we can be strategic with the American Rescue Plan resources, I will absolutely be proposing some of these systems building type of things that will allow us to, not only in the context of COVID, but also just for an ongoing, raising the bar for us, just generally to be able to build some of these things with some of these one-time dollars. But we'll see if they, how these kinds of options measure up to other very critical needs for those monies. So.
Chair Menke, Mayor Hill has his hand raised, and then Member Maxfield has her hand raised as well.
Okay, great. Mayor?
Moving off the topic just a little bit, but Jennifer just mentioned the ARP dollars coming, and as I read the memo that was presented to us, I know we are on an accrual method of accounting, and we know that we're going to get half of the ARP dollars in fiscal year 21-22, and the second half of that at a later time. Are we going to then, as it says, put the $7 million in receivables until we get the dollars, the whole amount in this current budget?
Assuming we vote to approve that, yeah. How is that going to work, Jennifer?
Well, it depends on the process of how we decide to use the funds. And so even though from a cash perspective, if we're only getting half of it up front, it doesn't mean that we have to limit ourselves to spending on the cash level. So that's my thinking of just taking that number and dropping it in. I don't anticipate that would be a likely way that we would do it, but it is an option. So that's why I didn't propose let's put half of it in, but we absolutely could go that way too. So
I just wanted to get a little clarification, because the second paragraph indicated that we probably would have accounts receivable for the other half when the cash wasn't there, but okay.
And part of the reason we suggested the whole amount is that depending on when the state actually releases funds, it's possible that we could receive the whole amount in next fiscal year. I mean, we could get the first check on July 1st and the last check on June 30th of next year. And so it felt like, just in terms of sort of technical process, let's put what we think the whole amount is in the budget now. If the Budget Committee acts to approve the budget, the number we're going to ask you is in the memo. We'll find out what the actual number is before the issue comes to the council, and then we'll refine that action for council when they deal with adoption.
Thank you for that clarification.
Yeah, thank you, Jeff. Okay.
And then Meredith has her hand up too.
Yeah, and Meredith, you're next. I'm sorry.
Thanks. So Jennifer, I watched the December 16th meeting, and I definitely came away with the impression that everything was rosy. Were you thinking at that time that we would probably have to furlough our city employees? And also, at what point, what triggered the furloughing? What raised the alarm? Was there a financial statement that we all could have seen that would have said, oh, now we're looking at furloughing? Because I too was really surprised when I heard about it.
Well, when we started putting together the numbers and looking at the revenues, it became clear that if we did, essentially a continuation of core services as is into the next year, that we were underwater. It wasn't just that we didn't have enough reserves, we were literally underwater for FY22. So as soon as that became clear kind of in February, when everyone got in their budgets for the general fund, that's when we began talking about, okay, how can we look at this? And I think that because so much of it is staffing, and also again, my rookie year, not knowing whether, okay, how does McMinnville handle this? Are we looking at layoffs? I wasn't sure what kind of options folks would be open to. I'm used to doing furloughs, and so that is I think a solution for a short term. And so because there has been work, as also Jeff mentioned, over the last couple of years, which also got delayed partly because of COVID, looking at how to provide potentially better services for fire and EMT across a larger district area, and that there might be win-win opportunities in terms of resources available. It wasn't clear to me how quickly that also would happen. So it's a complicated thing with a lot of balls in the air, and then you all being, just the downside of having a new person. I wasn't able to serve you well to get more quickly off the mark with what I was seeing.
So I see Councilor Peralta has his hand up. Let me tack on a little bit more. Pardon me?
I can see it now, but go ahead.
Okay, great, thank you. Jennifer needs to stop saying she's the rookie in the room. She hasn't been here a long time, but she's really a seasoned finance director. And I don't want you to think that we sort of stumbled into this budget just because Jennifer was new. And so she's sort of setting herself up to take a fall that's not hers to take. Quite frankly, we worked really hard as an executive team to come up with as many options as we could. We really tightened things down on an expense side. We started to look at the potential for revenues. There were a few kind of key revenues that we felt comfortable bumping up a little bit, but the reality is 70% of this general fund budget is people. You can't have a meaningful redirection of resources without impacting staff. And when we looked at the whole, notwithstanding the fact that it's big, we still think it's a short-term whole. And so for us, we felt that furloughs was the least damaging option to create some savings in the budget on a personnel side and have the least amount of interruption to services as possible. The other thing to remember is this is February. Nobody had a shot in their arm at that point in February, with the exception of a handful of firefighters. We did not know what the trajectory of the economy or the pandemic was going to look like. We had just heard about these federal funds that would be coming our way, but had even less information, far less information than we have now. And we still don't have enough certainty around it to be able to make recommendations to you. So our feeling was that as we were working on the potential for a fire district, we were going to present a series of discussion options to the council and the budget committee about revenue alternatives. We were looking for the best the least worst option, if you will. And it felt to us like eliminating positions and laying people off was more draconian than creating a furlough program. And we disclosed the prospect of a furlough program to the council in public in early March. And so while the council didn't take any action on it and it seemed out of context for what we talked about in December, things had changed enough over the course of those 2 or 3 months that we felt that the furlough was the appropriate and prudent thing to do. We also felt like enacting it at the time and not waiting for the fiscal year would give us the ability to create some additional savings in the current fiscal year that would sort of soften the landing into next fiscal year. Because if we're saving $650,000 starting in April, we don't have to take that whole $650,000 out of the next fiscal year's budget. And then Councilor Peralta had his hand up. Chair Menke.
Thank you, Chair Menke and Jeff. I just wanted to second what Jeff said, that I don't think Jennifer needs to fall on her sword or that Jeff needs to fall on his sword over the December meeting. I think that was an outlier. I'm not sure exactly why we got the information that we did presented in that way at that time. But folks who were on the committee, this committee last year, will recall that I had thought that we should consider furloughing at that time, based on my understanding of where the budget was and was likely to be headed. So I was very surprised by the report that we got in December. I consider it an outlier, and the rest of the data that we have today seems consistent with how I've seen this budget tracking. So I just wanted to say, Jennifer, I really appreciate the kind of reality-based approach that you've taken, and Jeff, in terms of putting this budget together. It makes it a little bit of a less pleasant process, but I do think that it's important to use, you know, real data and accurate data. So I appreciate that, and I think I'm happy with the direction that we're moving, even if this is an interim step to where I'd like to get. So thank you for the robust discussion that you've entertained tonight.
You're muted, Chair Minke.
Again. Okay, is there any other comments at this particular point in time? I don't see any hands, but maybe I'm missing some.
No, no hands.
Okay, great discussion. Actually, I think we have a number of items to list out at the end of this that we want to see action items for the future. So thank you so much for everyone's comments and thoughts on this. And I too I give Jennifer very high marks. She is just down to earth and very straightforward about her approach. She's very smart, and I think she deserves many kudos for getting this budget out so timely, and all of the other work that she's done this year. Okay, so we were back at page 14 through 30. One thing I would like you to do, Jennifer, if you could do it briefly, because sometimes I think it's a little confusing, particularly to new members, is discussing the difference between all city funds versus the general fund. Could you just kind of succinctly put that in?
Sure. So the general fund is not actually the largest fund, but it's the fund, as Jeff mentioned, where most of the city activities are taking place. But then after that, there are a number of other funds that carry out work that is tangible. You see the street fund works on the streets. The wastewater, it's a combined services and capital fund combination that is funded by ratepayers. And then there are a handful of other special revenue funds and capital funds where, for accounting purposes or even kind of statutory reasons, we need to distinguish among themselves. So the list of all of the funds is, in the financial overview section,
I think it's page 15.
Yeah, you can see so 15 goes through the description of them, but if you want just a real short, sweet resources and expenditures, it's page 19 and 20. So that gives you the list and the overview of what all of the revenues are just bought for each fund in the city of McMinnville, and some historic data that's required by state law for us to provide to you, as well as expenditures. So that's a snapshot of the entire organization. And then there is, after we're done with the city's budget committee meeting, we will open up the urban renewal. So there are two separate actual entities. So everything the city does except for the urban renewal accounting and that financial footprint is contained in the city of McMinnville budget. So does that kind of go to what you were hoping to get?
I think that helps. Okay. I think it's a hard concept when you initially look at it, although we have some very knowledgeable people that are sitting on the budget committee at this point. Okay, so any questions at this point on that first section? Hearing none, we
Hold on,
have.
hold on, Kelly. I'm sorry. I apologize. I did want to. Sorry. I'm just trying to grab the page here. So I just wanted to make a note that that this budget includes a retirement of debt service that reflects a $945,000 reduction in annual taxes paid by MAC residents, because in this budget, we are no longer paying the parks bond, right? And so, right, and so my question was, and I don't know if this is the right place to bring it up. Do we have a sense yet of sort of when we're going to try and stream in the parks conversation? I was surprised not to see anything in there for consulting or something to move towards a possible replacement of that bond.
But we're in the midst of backpack at this point in time, and I think that's all a lead into what will eventually become a discussion of a parks bond.
So there's no budget associated with that for this year, though. I just wanted to make a note of that.
So I would let Susan Muir talk a little bit about that, as well as the trajectory of the MacPac and the time that group still has to work.
Sure, happy to do it. I'm Susan Muir, the Parks and Rec Director. Yes, we do have a bond retiring. We've been talking about that for a while, and that bond has been so helpful to us as a community and really enabled us to build new parks in many different areas of the city. We had anticipated, I think the first forecast was to redo the Parks Master Plan in 2021. And as you all know, we are short resources to do a lot of that. It's now, I think currently, and Heather's, Richards manages this part with the Planning Commission. I think we're on target for 2023 to kick that process off. In the meantime, we did the facilities condition assessment, which highlighted for us that in Parks and Rec, we had 2 buildings that were at the end of their useful life, and that launched the MacPac project, which deals with indoor facilities. The Parks and Rec, or what I would think of as maybe a Parks and Open Space plan, will deal with the outdoor components of that. So hopefully we'll be done with the indoor facility planning and roll right into the outdoor facility planning with our community, which I anticipate to be a great opportunity, and I'm really excited about that. We do not have that in there. We have been brainstorming how we might be able to bring resources to that plan to kick it off a little bit earlier, and we always look for those opportunities, but you're correct, there is no money earmarked in this budget for that.
Other questions, Al?
No.
Okay, I'm not seeing any other hands. So are we ready to move on to the next section? The next section is fund definitions and financial overview. And I guess I want to point out on page 40, there's a organization chart, which is helpful for those. Do we have any questions on these particular pages? These are mostly definitions.
Chair, will you continue to state page numbers as we work through this?
Yes, I'm doing that. Page 34 to page 40.
Sorry, Chair. I did have one other question. Jennifer, which line item from revenue is the franchise fees that we get for utilities?
They have distinct line items, and they are back in the non-departmental. So they're mostly listed on page 342 of the budget is printed.
So are they not? Do they not show up in the all city resources by fund? Are they in any of those categories?
No, they all flow to the general fund as unrestricted resources. And so they're actually listed at the very back of the general fund lineup in the budget book.
Thank you.
Okay, others? Seeing no further, so nothing on 34 to 40. Debt overview. Jennifer, do you want to does anyone have a question on this, or would you like Jennifer to give you a brief update on it? Take you through page 44. So I'm talking about page 42 through page 44. Any questions on debt overview? We're good? All right, moving on then. Personnel services and supplemental information. This would be page 46 to page, which is always tricky because there's a hole there, page 65. One thing I would like to point out on the first page of page 46, if you look at the bottom right-hand corner, they're talking about Piers 1 and 2 members. And if you will note, next year, the 2021-23 year, we're looking at a drop in this particular level of funding. So I think that's encouraging, and it's definitely pointed out within the budget. Does anyone have questions in this particular area? I do want to also point out page 52. There's a couple of pages right in here, I think. Where is it? 50 and 52, looking at the overall full-time equivalent employees, and seeing that there's a negative change between last year and this year of 3.57 FTEs. And then looking at, I looked at the budget from last year, and I was surprised there's a fair drop in the amount of FTEs this year for full-time and part-time employees, and then a significant drop, obviously, because of Parks and Rec and stuff, of volunteers. So we come up with 890, whereas we had 1,326 the year before. Just kind of interesting thoughts. Anything on those?
I have two comments.
Okay.
The first is on page 55. We have the different levels of compensation. I still think the planning director is uncompensated in our undercompensated in our organization. I also point out on page 61 the bonus compensation line for police. I really like that Chief Scales puts the information about both training and different things that they get additional compensation for in the budget. I really appreciate that. I encourage other departments to consider doing that. In this particular one, I would encourage the police, if this is not already captured in one of their categories, to add the mental health certifications and training, similar to what Officer Height took on, as something that they provide incentives and bonuses for in terms of certification, because I feel like we're moving towards a model of less incarceration for addiction, and less incarceration or not incarcerating houseless people. And so I think shifting training in that direction, I think, makes sense. Those are my only two comments for that section. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Sal. So any other comments on anyone from that particular section? 46 through 65. Yes, who?
Counselor Geary has his hand up.
Gary, I see your hand.
Yeah, so on this one with this schedule, if this is not the right spot, that's fine, but point me in the right direction. But I also, if my understanding correctly, this is the kind of the first year we're switching over to implementing that wage and salary study. And is this what we're looking at here? Can I just, my question, I guess, is, can I just hear the staff's overview on how they think that's going to roll out, how that's going overall? Just, I don't have a specific line item. Was just, we're going to start looking at a new way to do this, and I'd love to spend a minute hearing from staff.
Sure. So I'll tee it up and then turn it over to Kylie Bayer for a correction, which will probably be needed. So we have been working through a classification and compensation project for about a year and a half. We're nearing the final steps of that process, and Kylie can talk a little bit more about the specific details related to the process and what has yet to happen. Our expectation for implementation is we have a handful of employees, and this is more of a market-based system, and there's significant internal equity work that's been done to create the new compensation system. We have a handful of employees who are below the range where they should be, and the work in this current fiscal year will be to move people who are below their range into those ranges, and we'll be looking at probably a multiple year full implementation of the whole class and comp system. So I'll turn it over to Kylie for clarification and correction.
Thank you, Jeff. So we will, like he mentioned, we've got, I believe it's $45,000 earmarked in this next year's budget to implement the very first phase of this class and comp update. And there are a small number of employees whose salaries are below what the recommended salary ranges are from our consultant. The goal is to bring those folks into those ranges, and then while we're continually looking at our budget, determine the best course of action to implement the rest of those recommendations. You'll see the salary schedules in the proposed budget. Most of our, I believe most if not all of our salaries have 6 different steps in them. And in the proposed recommendations from our consultant, there are more like 15 steps. So this is it's a significant change in the system that we're looking at here. The goal will be to first get folks into that new salary range and then determine how to get people to where they should be based on the number of years they have had in their position. We're still determining what the overall cost for that would look like. And like Jeff had mentioned, there's a lot of different ways for us to get there. It will most likely be a multi-year project to phase in to make sure that we can afford that because it could end up being quite spendy. Like Jeff also mentioned, we looked at, we looked out at the market with the consultants. We looked at the labor market to see what positions are being paid elsewhere, and we compared that to what we have right now. We also look at internal equity. So that is looking at the amount between different positions, making sure that positions that are very similar or that have similar decision-making authorities are compensated appropriately and similarly as well. We also have the Oregon Equal Pay Act to be mindful of. So there's external factors that we look at. There's also internal factors that we look at. So as we look at all of that stuff, we will be pushing forward recommendations to phase this in. The next step is employees will be receiving their recommended classification, and they'll have an opportunity to file an appeal with our consultants if they feel they got that wrong. So we're looking at doing that over the next few weeks and then taking all that information, and we'll have a much more complete picture of what is ahead of us. So I think that's all I've got on class and comp.
Thanks for the minute explanation. A couple quick follow-ups. I think you answered it, just want to clarify it. But so the cost, I understand we've got $45,000 in for initial cost adjustments. We don't know the rest of the cost of the remaining adjustments.
So the rest of the cost, I don't have a final number because we haven't gone through that appeals process yet. And okay. So I'm not comfortable giving a clear number on that because we're just not 100% sure.
And that makes sense. So the 45, how did we get to the 45, and what's the methodology for who got that rolled out, sort of?
So the new ranges, and this is, so the 45, it's based on the assumption that we're going to adopt everything in this, in the recommendations from our consultants. So the $45,000 is for the handful of employees whose salaries are below what the starting ranges or starting wages are in their new salary range. So we just knew that the first step of getting this process put together is to at least get people into the salary range if they're not already within it. The rest of our employees are within the new salary bands in the current ranges that they have right now.
Cool. One last one, and it's not in the nuts and bolts money, it's in the I guess hugs and kisses part, would be how has that gone over with staff? I mean, I imagine it's probably well received, especially at a time like this, to be bringing those people up.
Well, not everybody's been notified yet because we need to go through the appeals process. And so we're going to do that part first and make sure we've got that locked and loaded. And then the folks who are below range on those positions, will bring them in. So no hugs and kisses just yet. Hopefully within the next couple weeks.
Got it. Thanks.
Member Phoenix has her hand raised. Chair Minke.
Who?
Member Wendy Phoenix.
Wendy, please.
Hello, everybody. Hi. I have a quick question about this. Does the 45K, is that to bridge the gap, or is that the budget for the rest of the year for those new wages?
That $45,000 gets those folks into the new range for the entire year. The following year and years after that, there will likely be increases for other employees as well to get them to the appropriate step in the new salary range associated with the number of years that they've had in their position.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Good question. Wendy, okay. Anybody else? I don't see any other hands.
No.
So, okay, we are now moving then to 66 to 68. I believe is the general fund, the beginning fund balance. Any questions? No hands. Okay, then let's move to page 69 to, sorry, these pages are hard to work with sometimes. Administration departments, page 69 to 91. Any questions on that? This in particular is general fund administration.
I had a couple of comments, 69 to 91. I just wanted to comment that I noticed that there's an executive assistant being hired in legal. Maybe that position's being shared as well with HR, and that the legal has added the Westlaw database. I'm shocked that our legal department actually got by without having that database for as long as they did. So I just wanted to comment and say that I appreciated the professionalism or the professionalization of the department, and also to say that I think it's really smart to spend money on administrative staff in that case, so we don't have attorneys that are much more compensated taking on work that could be better done by an executive position. So I just wanted to make a note that I appreciated those changes.
I think when Amanda got here, her second question was, why don't we have Westlaw? First was, I think the first one was, where's my desk? Mayor Hill has his hand up.
Yes, I see that.
I just bring to everyone's attention that, like I do every year, that on page 79 is our city memberships of whether it be Mid-Willamette Valley, the COG, and League of Oregon Cities. Just those are the associations that we're a part of that give us assistance.
Thank you, Mayor. Okay, seeing no other hands, we are then moving to page 92, Finance Department, to page, and I have a problem with this because all my holds are on both sides.
I mean, I had a backup comment in there because I think in that last section was income received from rent from Chamber of Commerce. Is that correct?
Yes, it is.
I see that's kind of holding steady. That building is running down. When are we going to re-engage that conversation with that organization on rent and lease, and if it's time to work on that building, and if they need to start finding it, or yeah?
We've had that we've sort of started that conversation a couple of times with the chamber. The last time we talked, the chamber was going to convene sort of a subcommittee of the board. We have, Amanda, you can remind me if I'm wrong, I do think we have updated some lease information. Have we sent that to the chamber and waiting a response? Is that where we are?
Yeah, I believe that's correct. I'd have to go back because it's been a couple months since we've had the communication, but yes.
And
Cool.
then Councilor Drabkin has her hand up.
Yeah, I see. Remy?
I just always like to be wary of wading down into things that should be handled at the administrative level. I say that in Friendships Act, but renegotiating contracts is not something that the council should be doing specifically. And also, I would just throw out a word of caution that as rent prices are quickly increasing in McMinnville, that perhaps sometimes the intent of that comment might not go in the direction it wanted to. If we were to look at commercial real estate prices as they're quickly rising, it could have a negative impact. So I just like to be always I always like to be on the side of caution. And so I'm just sharing that. Thank you.
Good thoughts, Councilor Drabkin. Let's see, Remy's the last one with hands up. Anybody else? Okay, then we are going to move to page 92 to page 102. Any questions on this? This is general fund finance. Anybody? Okay. Moving then to engineering, which is 103 to
112.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Councilor Geary has his hand up.
Councilor Gary, please enlighten us.
Okay, a couple quick ones observationally. I see on the list, down on the list, but on the list is the planned improvement at Michael Book and Baker Creek, the implementation of the light there that I was hoping to get in closer to just starting to build out after Baker Creek, but glad that it's in there now. Thank you for putting that in. We heard a lot in there about safety concerns, and I knew it was in the plan, and so making room in the budget for it this year. Would one entertain a question about, or an answer about being on that list, its actual viability, feasibility of build out, and where we're at in the process of plan and engineering development and bid RFP and implementation of that if possible. And then a second question would be, what if any is a plan now that Mike has retired to assess the organization of the department as he no longer wants to be maybe a temp employee or on a contract basis and to wander off into the sunset, but how that conversation is going and how this budget reflects that.
I'll handle that last question first. We are preparing to post a notice to recruit to fill that executive level position probably within the next couple of weeks or so. And we do not forecast any significant organizational structural changes as we move toward that recruitment. And I'll let Mike answer the question about the traffic signal.
Nice to see everybody. I'm Mike Bissett, retired Community Development Director, working back part-time to help bridge the gap until, well, not until they hire someone, but to get us through this budget process. When we get back to the Transportation Fund, Fund 45, we will find professional services and construction dollars for the potential installation of a traffic signal at Michael Book and Baker Creek. The first part of that process will be to do an RFQ, a request for qualifications, to find a traffic engineering firm that will do an analysis of that intersection to determine if a signal is warranted. Based on the community concerns, we believe it's possible that a signal is warranted at that location. And if the results of the study indicates that is the case, we do have funding proposed for the construction of the signal in next fiscal year. But the simple answer is that work hasn't started. The RFQ process will happen after the budget's formally adopted in June. You want to do those traffic studies when you have school in session and normal school traffic happening. So the study itself will likely happen in the fall after school is back in session. So hopefully that gives you an idea of the timeline.
Yeah, two quick follow-ups if I may. You've done that process start to finish from where you're at to build out of the light, right? Traffic study to build out of the light. What is a common timeline for start to finish on that? Is it feasible to construct that light by the end of the fiscal year? If that's where we're at?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Particularly given there are very little road reconstruction requirements related to that intersection itself. There's likely some curb ramps that'll have to be redone, but it's not like the old Sheridan Road project where we had a whole corridor we had to rebuild that incorporated a signal. This is a standalone signal with the road system's already built around it. So it's absolutely feasible to have a design done by the end of the calendar year and a bid out at the beginning of the year and construction happening in the spring.
Good thing we don't need any wood in that project. Woo! The second follow-up to that would be, you said started with a traffic analysis. Did that, given that it was a project identified in the TSP that had a bunch of traffic analysis in it, that either is that data insufficient, old, just requires an updating? What's the calculus behind investing in that? If we already had data that might need to build out?
So the transportation system plan and the recent traffic studies you've seen related to development along that corridor have indicated that a signal will be needed at some point in the future as traffic increases. And so there are a very specific set of warrants that are used to determine whether a signal is necessary at a location. And there are, a traffic signal is not something you want to put in where it's not needed, because it can become much more dangerous than the current condition. And so what the traffic engineer will do is conduct those warrants based on an analysis of the traffic. And then if it meets the warrants that satisfy the installation of a signal, we would move forward with the project. If it doesn't meet the warrants now, they may suggest some safety improvements to enhance the safety of the intersection until such time as the traffic level warrants the signal. But it's a pretty mathematical driven, science driven process that will be used to determine when and if the signal needs to go in.
Copy that. That explanation helped me understand the when and if. So thanks.
Okay, Councilor Drobkin.
Thank you. I was wondering, Mr. City Manager, would you just expand a little bit on the in this rehiring or hiring process? We had a discussion the other day, and you were talking about shifting the title of Community Development Director to help add clarity to the departments, and I think that would be useful information for the whole council. Do you mind briefly going over that?
Yeah, one of the recommendations that we'll be pursuing is to recast the department as the Public Works Department. Community development tends to imply a suite of services that often include planning, economic development, building, that sort of thing. More traditional public works departments are infrastructure and engineering focused, and that's really what our department looks like. The title is a legacy. Mike's had the title for his whole time here. Every year when he goes to a conference, they ask him if he's in the wrong place because they think he should be hanging with the planners, but he really should be hanging with the public works folks.
Good to know. Any further questions? I don't see any other hand raises. If not, we are now going from 113 to 145. That is Planning Department. Any questions on the Planning Department?
I have, I'm trying to be mindful of other people may have questions, but I'm just going to go ahead and shout out if people don't. I've noticed that there is a reduction in Planning Department temporary workers, like $70,000 roughly. In addition to that, you know, with the furloughs, I'm wondering if our Planning Department has sufficient staffing resources to meet the goals. I feel like they're already pretty overworked with the demands that the state has been placing, and there may be more demands to come.
So thank you, Councilor Peralta. The temporary hire in last fiscal, the fiscal year we're in right now, and the previous fiscal year was our hire DJ Heffernan to help us with the UGB remand response. And actually you've given me an opportunity to sort of brag a little bit. So instead of hiring a consultant team at, you know, a couple $100 per hour, I called DJ, who used to do that work and went into retirement, and asked him if he would come out of retirement and work for us temporarily as an employee. And then he wouldn't have to set up the business structure, and we wouldn't have to pay for that overhead. So it worked out brilliantly, and we saved a lot of money doing it that way. But that was built in specifically for that project. In terms of the state mandates we're working under and the deadlines, you know, we are doing the best that we can, and we will get it done.
Any other questions? Seeing none?
I had a question. I'm trying to find, oh, there we go, find my page. Page 142, line 7750, 7750. Run through just quick what that list is in a little extrapolation, sort of area plan, the consultant services for what specifically in the long range plans, and just tie it to the names of the efforts you were undertaking, just so I can.
Yep.
Please.
So the legal expenses are what they are. We sometimes need to engage outside land use attorneys to help us through some processes. So we usually budget for that. In the past year, we budgeted $50,000 for the UGB effort because that's particularly legal. This year we ratcheted it down quite a bit. The area plan is the initial planning process that we need to go through. We made a commitment to do 1 year for our UGB lands for them to be able to actually come into the city, annex, and redevelop. And so this is the Fox Ridge Road area is the first area that we're going to undertake with that area planning effort. And because we do have some properties that are ready to go and move forward, but we want to make sure that they're interfacing properly with the other properties around them. To the question that Council Peralta asked, you know, we're balancing staff capacity to get our mandates done with what we can do in-house and what we need some help with. So that is one that we're looking to get some outside help to do. The transcriptionist are outsourcing for minutes to support our planning committees that work on different efforts, and particularly our planning commission. The consultant services, that is a hold that we have in there to be able to respond to grant matches. So we are right now actively applying for grants that we might be able to bring in to help with our work next year in terms of some additional projects. But we need to be able to leverage some local funds into that, or there might also be other needs that come forward in terms of state mandates that we need to be responding to that we weren't aware of. So that's sort of a holding line for consultant services that haven't already been pre-assigned. The residential code package is House Bill 2001. That's a mandate that we need to respond to by June 30th, 2022, and we're working through that right now. That's an existing contract that will straddle both fiscal years. The Goal 7 inventory is an existing contract based on City Council direction. That's the hazardous planning. That's the natural features planning that we've been asked to do as part of our growth planning efforts for the UGB lands and within the city. So that's underway, and that contract is straddling both fiscal years. The growth planning itself is I went through this with City Council when we talked about how we need to amend our existing package of the housing needs analysis, the economic opportunity analysis, and the BLI that we did in 2019, because we're under a state mandate based on House Bill 2003 to adopt something by December of 2023, which may include efficiency measures and the UGB planning again. So that is funds to help that effort. And I think when I went through that presentation with City Council, I outlined what I expected it would cost for each fiscal year to do that effort and meet that mandate. And then the CLG match, that's our historic preservation match for a grant fund that we get from the state to do historic preservation work.
Thank you for that.
Yeah, so we don't do a lot of, we're labor and consultant work. We don't have capital expenses. And so that's why with the professional services, I do make a concerted effort to sort of lay out exactly what the funds are for, reflecting our work plan that we've brought to City Council previously, as this is what we're going to be looking at over the next couple of years.
Makes sense. I just wanted to connect that list with that list. And then on your long range planning section, I see those lists there, including the TSP. Thank you. Perhaps a crystal ball question, but likelihood and schedule of getting those. I mean, I know some of those efforts are underway in various esoteric or not so esoteric ways, but likelihood we get through or start or chug through those for real this year, fiscal year?
100% likely. So we presented a work plan to you of our public facility planning based on when we expected start dates and end dates. Most of them are 2-year processes. So you're going to see them in this next fiscal year and the following fiscal year. In this next fiscal year for public facility planning, we have the transportation system plan planned for and budgeted for. We have the wastewater reclamation facility planned for and budgeted for. We have the wastewater conveyance system planned for and budgeted for. And MAC Water and Light is budgeting and planning for updating the water master plan. And then as Susan Muir indicated earlier in the meeting tonight, the parks master plan and the stormwater plan will start in 2 years from now. And in the fiscal year budget, you'll see next year.
So as if I paid you for that segue on the park master plan, is that a planning budgeted and planning run effort, or is it a parks department budgeted and parks department run effort?
That's usually an internal discussion at cities as to how that's done. Susan and I have talked at length about it. I think it will be a collaborative effort between our two teams, but planning will take the lead because it is an amendment into our comprehensive plan. There is a lot of legal processes that we need to make sure we're maintaining to be able to put together the SDC methodology and everything else to ensure that we're able to support the plan, but we will work in collaboration with each other.
Okay, and then I know that was slated for 2021, and I know you have a full boat already, but I'll just voice my grumbling on having to wait.
So that's actually slated for 2022. So 2021 is all the other things I just described to you.
Right.
And we talked about that.
Wait, what's 2022? The park plan?
Yeah.
Oh, I heard it said as 2023.
Well,
I apologize. I said that. Heather manages the work program and the calendar. The last I saw it was 2023, but it does move around based on her workload.
Yeah. We can push it to 2023. I'm sure my team would be like, okay.
We're going to hire the worst punter to play on our team.
Yeah, so, Councilor Gary, we can only do so much a year.
Totally
And I'm
understand.
pushing my staff to 100% maximum capacity.
Totally understand that it's the biggest folding chair grumble of not getting the parks plan, but I like where it's at on the radar. So thanks.
Okay, seeing no further hand raises, I'm going to move to the police department, page 146 to page 154. Any questions? Sal?
Yeah, I just had a couple of questions. The first question with regard to the SROs, is it correct that the school district pays half the cost of those? And is there an opportunity to renegotiate that to encourage that dollar amount up in terms of the school district's portion? And then the second question is that we've talked a few times in council about the changes to the decriminalization of possession of drugs, as well as dealing with homelessness. And I'm wondering, is there a thought towards beginning to maybe try and transition the department to include more mental health capacity than you have today, Chief? Those are my two main questions.
Yeah, thank you, Councilor Peralta. And I'll tackle the first one with respect to the SROs. Yes, it is true. The school district does pay 50% of essentially 9 months of their service. That's with full roll-ups. And we do enter into negotiations with the district every year for the services to include payment. Obviously, we have a new superintendent that's going to be starting, so we'll be entering into those discussions. I would imagine relatively soon, as it relates to FY 21-22, the cost for that service. So, did that answer your question?
Yeah, on the SROs, yes.
With respect to the decriminalization, a little bit of background. There still is a criminal amount. The possession of controlled substances is still criminal. It's just at a certain level. So obviously the number of arrests that we're making for the have been down. But with respect to the question about the increase with mental health service or capacity, I'd like to, on the 16th of June, we'll have Eugene Police Department and the Whitebird Clinic coming in to discuss their cahoots model, which we've all discussed at certain times throughout the year about how they're doing it. I think that'll provide a framework for us to understand how we can right-size what Yamhill County, specifically McMinnville, looks like. Obviously, that's a tremendous investment in those resources. But those are discussions also that the city manager and I have had about, what does it look like moving forward, even without the decriminalization? What's it look like in making sure that our public safety services aren't being drowned out with mental health calls, and that those services are being provided by those that are professionally trained. And I would add that a majority of our officers are CIT trained. It's critical incidents in dealing with the mental health population, but by and large, that's not to the same degree that you would obviously see with a clinician or somebody that does this for a living. So I'm certainly, I'm hopeful that we have the opportunity to reimagine what those types of services do look like with relation to mental health calls. Did that answer your question, Councilor Peralta?
It did. I do have a follow-up question, Chief, and this relates to the comment that I made earlier in the budget hearing. Is there an opportunity? I noticed that you provide additional incentives for staff to get additional certifications and training, and we provide resources for staff to get additional certifications and training. Are there additional certifications and training over and above what you outlined in the budget that people could get that would facilitate more community policing, and this is not a criticism so much as it is how can we do things better, facilitate more community policing around addiction and homelessness? Are there additional kinds of training that we could encourage as a matter of policy, or your department could encourage along those lines beyond what they're already getting?
Well, like I mentioned, the CIT training with the mental health services, that sort of outreach is really the one critical piece that I like all of our officers to get. You had mentioned earlier about, sort of outlining or, incentivizing that type of training. I think it's a matter of policy for the department. And that's just becomes a sort of part of who they are, and as an officer, that they're able to deal with people dealing with mental health crisis. I don't necessarily need to see it incentivized through monetary. I think it just becomes a part of our police culture and how we provide our services to the citizenry. And as a matter of course, that would be something, obviously, if you were talking about some sort of a monetary incentive, that's something that's negotiated through collective bargaining with the police union. I hope I answered your question.
You did, thank you.
We have a few more other people that have questions. Zach?
Remy had her digital hand up way before me.
Oh, okay. Well then, Remy?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Chief. And thank you, counselors. I have a few responses to some of Sal's and then I have just a couple of questions of my own. This is not my personal perspective. This is based on commentary I've had with the school district in the past. And as the chief pointed out, we have a new superintendent. So how policy and decision making goes from this point forward, and the perspective of the school board, I can't speak to what that is currently, but I know in the past the question of the schools contributing to the funding of a police officer in and of itself has been a a debated topic. So as the chief said, those negotiations are ongoing, but certainly more than one person within the school system has questioned why the school system is co-funding an SRO to begin with. And I am not espousing that it's right or wrong. I'm not coming on one side of that issue or another, but I do want to present that alternative perspective that schools are in our community. And so there is a kind of greater community question about how we fund those SROs. Number two, on the question of mental health training, I think this again goes back to a much larger philosophical question of how we address some of these issues. And initially, many decades ago, when it was proposed that some of these services, if you'll call them, although that's not the right word, but responses would be turned over to police. Law enforcement across the United States generally was not supportive of taking on mental health services, that their purpose was to focus on crime and that there were other bodies that were charged with mental health services. And I think that that's a conundrum that we find ourselves in today, that our police are often charged with being first responders on mental health issues. And so we have a much greater question as a city and as a nation but as a city with our particular budget and as a county to face, which is what is the appropriate method of response on mental health issues. And that will infiltrate into all of these different budgets. But I think it's something we need to approach very carefully, and with thoughtfulness, a very holistic thoughtfulness that includes thoughtfulness about use of the time of our police department, who is best trained to respond in those situations, and then what our ultimate goals and outcomes are. Because of course there's initial interfacing, but ultimately I think we all have the desire that the same outcome is that a person who's having a mental health crisis then is surrounded with services in a way in which those mental health crises can be continuously addressed, which is not the role of our police department. So I think we need to be very careful around that. Those are my responsive comments. I just have a couple questions, Chief, on there was some information included about Spanish-speaking staff, and I know that Director Bayer has also talked about that before, that there have been incentives for bilingual officers. And then you also mentioned the Unidos Alert Team. Mm-hmm. And so I was wondering if you could give us, and if the data was in the packet and I missed it, I apologize, but I was wondering if you could give us the data on bilingual staff. And then I was wondering if you could give us a brief synopsis of the Unidos Alert Team. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. So the status is, with respect to the number of Spanish-speaking staff, is I believe it's 3 right now, 2 or 3. And I know one of our front record specialists just within the last 6 months left. So that is something that is always certainly attractive in our community, when we have a population of, I think 20+% of Latinx community members. So we need to do a better job when we do hire. We're not hiring right now, but when we do, is recruiting and soliciting those types of those skill sets that we're looking for. With respect to the alert team, it's this year's been obviously COVID difficult, but I will say in talking with Miriam and as we've conversed over the years, specifically probably 9 months ago when we had our last meaningful conversation, is those relationships that I've had that our department has with Unidos and Alert are critical in forming legitimacy between the police department and the community, specifically the communities of color. So I am a big fan, and I think we're doing a reasonably good job. I mentioned that, I think we can do a better job with respect to having a committee that comes to the PD, and it's sort of an advisory committee to my office where we can share ideas and thoughts. But my specific comments are as long as I'm chief, that will be a major priority and initiative to make sure that we're having those connections. I hope I was able to answer that question, Councilor Dropkin.
Thank you.
And I didn't freeze. I'm the only one that, I usually freeze on Zoom calls.
Okay, assuming this is in correct order, Zach Gary should be next.
Yeah, Chief, I usually freeze in police training drills, so.
You pass out in police training drills.
Just seeing you, Chief, I break out in a cold sweat thinking about it. A couple quick questions. Oh man, I just took my thumb out of my page to make a joke. Page 157, I can't remember what line it is, but the park ranger, it's where the park rangers are. Did that get zeroed out? Did I read that right? Am I just not reading it correctly? I thought we were still in there going the project.
I think we're into that. We're not into that area yet, Zach.
Okay. It's a.
Okay. Debbie, what do you have?
No.
Hey, real quick, Councilor Gray. Yes, park rangers are a part of our this fiscal year, this remaining fiscal year, and next fiscal year. And in fact, the program started, so it is in there. It's under the investigation support fund, I believe. It's in there. It's tucked in there for extra help.
Thanks.
Okay. Debbie.
Thank you. Chief, I see that we're submitting a grant application for body cams and in-car cameras.
Yes.
I see that line item. What is the likelihood you think that we would receive that grant, and is that an all or nothing grant, or is it something where we may get a portion of those funds?
No, it's 100% federally funded. So whatever funds we do get, we're seeking, I think a number that we put in there is $385,000. That would be body cams for our officers and in-car cams, updating. Our cars currently do have in-car cameras with audio in it, but it upgrades those platforms. It will be awarded. They have a scoring criteria. The grant has not even been submitted to the feds yet. Our consultant is working on drafting all the information that we provided them to submit to the federal government. And once we do get that, then obviously we go out for requests for quotes, et cetera. So I'm hopeful, in talking with our consultant, the likelihood of getting grants specifically for body cameras have been, the agencies that they've worked with have been fairly high. So I'm relatively optimistic that we'll get some money in some form or fashion. It might not be to the complete, the number that we had hoped for, but some is better than none. And with the federal reforms that come through, or there's nothing in the legislature right now with respect to body cams, but our staff is actually looking forward to the ability to have body cameras available to them to ensure that they're protected and that the citizens are protected by the video. So,
thank you.
You bet.
Jerry. Oh, did you have another question, Debbie? I'm sorry. Okay. Jerry.
Thank you. Chief, just had a question about retention of officers. It seems, there's a lot of media reports about some forces having difficulty retaining officers because of, salary is always an issue, and also burnout, workplace problems, stress, and those kind of things. So if you could just comment on that.
You bet. Thank you, Member Hart. With respect to retention, I think we have one vacancy right now, and we would not have a problem filling that vacancy. Obviously, the vacancies are going to be held through this year and in the next fiscal year. With respect to rollover and retention, we sort of anticipate, anywhere from 1 to 2 possibly leaving, not necessarily leaving the profession, but maybe going to a different community. The most recent ones that we've had leave have left not because of salary. I'll tell you, our salaries for our staff are right in line with comparable cities our size and even bigger. So I will say that relatively confident it's not salary, but if there are people leaving, it has been for family purposes. A couple people have moved to Bend because families have gone over there and who wouldn't want to live in Bend full time. And then the others have left again for family reasons, or they've got out of the business. But we usually anticipate, 2 people leaving. Right now, I'm fairly confident that staff retention, probably because of the uncertainty with COVID and funding for municipalities, that we should stay relatively firm. To your point though about retention and employee wellness, I started a program a number of years ago with respect to we do have the ability to have our staff talk to a clinician once a year. We also have weight rooms. We've got employee wellness program. So I think we're doing a better job, and we've seen that over the last few years, sort of taking the lead from Ben PD, who I would say is a national leader in ensuring employee wellness is high on a chief's or an organization's priority list. So I think we're doing a better job with that, certainly within the last 3 or 4 years with some of the programs that we've initiated locally even. And to Member Ferry's, we were able to get a bunch of weight room equipment that Linfield Athletics provided to us free of charge. So, and they even came and assembled it last year. So that gets a great deal of use. So I hope that answered your question, sir.
Thank you.
Yep.
Hey, Wendy Phoenix.
Hello, good evening. I wanted to kind of maybe ask a question, not necessarily budget related, but you mentioned that there are only 3 Spanish speaking officers. Mm-hmm. Is there any kind of education reimbursement program or any room in your budget to possibly provide some kind of a training so that you don't have to necessarily rely on hiring Spanish speaking officers? You can have bilingual officers?
Thank you for the question. No, we do not have like an educational reimbursement program. That again would be something that goes through the contract. And unfortunately, this fiscal year, it's not in the cards for us. But always looking for those types of incentives to have people receive that extra training is probably a really decent outlet or at least avenue to look through. So thank you for the question.
May I respond as well, Chair?
Remy?
Thank you. Wendy, I just want to say that we do have bilingual pay incentives.
Yes,
so
yes.
Yeah, there are pay incentives. It's in the first part under the personnel. Okay.
So there's I'm sorry, to clarify, so they get an incentive if they are bilingual? So if they take classes, and is there like a certification that says now I'm bilingual, and then they can receive that?
Yes, there is. So yes, they do receive a percentage of an incentive based on their level of certification, and we do certify with a company, and the name is Language Line. They provide us with services to test our officers to ensure that they're meeting a level of proficiency that meets the contract standard in the contract language standard. So yes, there is incentive.
Are the officers aware?
Oh yeah.
And why are they not? Why that seems like it would be a good money maker if you would just learn Spanish.
I think Kylie had her hand up.
Do you mind if I hop in? To be able to receive the bilingual incentive pay in the police department and in our other departments, you need to be at a fairly high proficiency level that you're not likely going to grasp through, a handful of courses at, say, a community college or other training program. Typically, folks who are receiving the bilingual pay incentive are either native speakers or grew up in a bilingual household. So the standard is quite high because we do need those folks to be able to relay really critical information to the residents that they're working with. So it's not impossible for somebody to go and pick it up and learn it and be able to do that, but it is unlikely that someone with no Spanish experience would be able to get to that level shortly.
Yeah, I think the only person that I know that was Captain Jasko. I think she went to had some coursework in college that allowed her to take advantage of that incentive program at one point or another, but not on the norm. Hope your question was answered.
Okay, I don't see any other hands raised for this particular section.
Chief, I would just say in this section, I would close by passing along my sympathies for the loss of Officer Axel.
Oh yeah, he was a fantastic canine. Fantastic canine. I'll pass that along to Officer Newhouse, or actually Sergeant Newhouse. Thank you.
Okay, well, Chief, we're still in place, so I wouldn't go too far. Pages 55 to 63. Pages 55 to 63, which is the Chief's office. So might want to hang there for a minute anyway. Anyone? Okay, pages 64 to 72, which is field operations for police. Any questions on that one? Okay, pages 73 to page 190, which is Police Department Investigations and Support. Any questions? Okay, and then page 191 to page 202, Muni Court. You can go now.
Oh, thank you. I'm released.
Sorry, but you never know. Nothing for Muni Court? Oh, okay. Tough. Anyone? Okay. Seeing none from Muni Court, fire. Page 204 to page...
Sorry, municipal court. On municipal court, I had a question. I'd heard that right now, when we had the Muni Court people come to visit us a couple of weeks ago, they were talking about different services they provided. And one of the services that was included that had some discussion was related to handling misdemeanor offenses in the municipal court. And given the shift to the decriminalization of drugs and the creation of a new misdemeanor offense category for drug possession, I wonder if it might be worth considering, not in this current budget cycle, but in the upcoming budget cycle, removing misdemeanors from the work that our court does and instead handing off more of those cases to the county drug court. And I'm not sure if we have the judge here or if Amanda or someone from that department can speak to that point.
I'd turn it over to Jennifer to talk about the operational components, and Amanda may have something to address from a legal perspective as well.
Yeah, we have not begun discussing that specific proposal, although we have begun a discussion about what our community partners are and what the role of a community court within the larger context of the justice system and what our different roles are, as something that is important and that we hope to be able to be moving forward, over the course of the next year, this fiscal year and next going on. So I don't know whether the judge or our staff have any particular opinions or thoughts on that at this stage, because it hasn't been that long that the new law has been in place. So I'm not entirely certain what changes they're saying that they might be interested in pursuing what you suggest, or some other solution or different approach.
Counselor Peralta, I'll just jump in as well. I agree with Jennifer. I think we have all had started the conversation of looking at the court and understanding what the vision for the court is and being strategic and making sure that the court reflects what the community's values are. And I think this is a component of that. Like Jennifer said, we haven't gotten into the specifics of this particular bill and the impact on the court. Obviously, with the budget and the state that we're in right now, cuts are made across the board. That has impacted the court. That's impacted the city prosecutor as well. So I think we really want to make sure that we're, you know, as we head into the next fiscal year, that we are having a conversation about what does the court look like. And I think that will be a component of it, is looking at, you know, what makes sense from a prosecution standpoint that the city's taking on.
Anything else, Sal?
No, thank you. I just in that case, if we can avoid a duplication of something, service that might be handled better by the county by virtue of their access to services, I think that should be considered. Thanks for the attention.
Yeah, thank you, Amanda. Okay, so moving right along, we are at 204 to 213, which is general fund fire. Anybody on general fund fire? Seeing no hands, looking at Sal carefully.
Chair, do you mind going just a little bit slower? My notes are in line, so I have to have the ability to flip through really quickly to find them. I'm sorry to slow you down.
I appreciate that, but I have a city manager who's probably going, will you speed it up, Kelly?
No.
Keep that in mind.
Well, I second.
What do you got, Rennie? What do you got, Rennie? You have a question?
I don't even know if I have a question in this section yet. That's the problem. I just need you to give me one more second in between moving from section to section, please.
Okay.
This will be embarrassing if I don't have questions for the rest of the packet, of course.
Well, you know, it's just the way it goes.
I'm good, thank you.
Okay, anybody else? All right, then we're going to move on to fire administration, 214 to 221. Anybody for those pages? 214 to 2021. 221, sorry. Seeing nothing, let's see. Oh, I think I overshot here. 222 to 224, fire prevention and life safety. And then we have ambulance, which is 225 to 231. Anything for any of those? And we are now into Parks and Rec. Okay. Parks and Rec, 232 to 240.
I would appreciate a little bit of commentary here, given the citizen comments and the emails we've received. I know that the community has been feeling the hurt a little bit of the closures, and I was hoping our Parks and Rec director could take a moment and address that. Thank you.
Well, actually, that's a parks maintenance function, which is subsequent. I mean, I'm not going to say Susan can't comment, but I'm assuming that most of the comments you're taking are about the access to the parks related to storm damage, and that's actually a parks maintenance issue and not a Parks and Rec department issue. Or am I misunderstanding the question?
We're trying to do this by section, and it doesn't apply to this section necessarily, Council President.
Then I would like to ask.
Specific, actually, more to addressing the functionality of the aquatic center and during furloughs. So I do believe it's appropriate at this time.
Yes, that is. Yeah.
All right, then go for it.
Thank you, Council President. Yes, COVID has been hard, very, very challenging for our community and for our budget and for our staff. We have been under trying to interpret guidelines that change daily, sometimes without notice. regarding the aquatic center, we were mandated to stay closed for quite a bit of this year, and then we're able to open for about a month, I think, and then we're required to close again because of the status that we were in terms of the risk categorization and other things. In addition to that, as you all have been talking about, we implemented a furlough program. In Parks and Rec, we were fairly fortunate, and this may sound a little strange, but we actually have a lot of vacancies that we could rely on to try and help fill that gap. But for the aquatic center, we did ultimately have to furlough to meet the goals there. What that means is we have closed 2 more days than we would traditionally be open pre-COVID. We are also having many more challenges related to hiring staff. A lot of people aren't ready to come back to work. A lot of the people that have been in our temporary personnel kind of pipeline have gone, left the area, graduated, whatever. So we actually are finding a number of challenges, not only the reduction in hours at the aquatic center, but Rob Porter, the aquatic center manager who's on the Zoom right now, has been on the deck, for example, because we don't have enough coverage for enough personnel in the queue to schedule them. So there are a number of struggles that we are having in Parks and Rec, and we anticipate we will continue to have them. And you probably saw that in our budget forecasting in terms of how do we guess. As Jeff said, the vaccines weren't in anybody's arms when we started to build this budget. We didn't know how quickly people were going to come back. In youth sports, and I'm drifting from the aquatic center a little bit, but we had our youth soccer program actually ended up having about the same number of registrants. So we were really excited that we were going to be back on track and starting to get revenue and be able to serve our community. And then we haven't had as great of return to our services in baseball and softball, for example. So we're not able to pinpoint any trends. We will try and open. Our goal is when we have the resources and we have the staffing and we have the ability under the guidelines to reopen, open more, increase our capacity, we will try and do that as often as we can. I brambled a little bit beyond your question, Council President.
Any other questions? Did you have anything, Remy, else besides that?
No, thank you.
Okay, thanks. Let's see if I can pick up where I'm at. Okay.
Just one comment before Kelly jumps off, so we all have time to change our pages. I just want to just say thanks, Susan, for your work during a difficult year. I know it's been a challenge for all of the staff, but no department has been as impacted as yours across the board, and you've handled it with grace and good cheer, and I know that I appreciate it. I know the community appreciates it. So thank you for your work, and I really appreciate both that and your staff.
Thank you. And Katie Noyd, Steve Ganser, and Rob Porter, Ann Lane before she left, really have carried the water on this for our community and kept the service that we can do at the forefront. And they're the heart and soul of the department. So thank you for that. For me, I would instantly say they are the soul of this.
I would echo Sal's comments. I won't try to rephrase them because he said it perfectly. I do want to add that it is helpful for us to know, like I didn't realize you were having trouble rehiring. I know that that's been prevalent throughout the business community. Certainly, I know it's very prevalent throughout the service community. I know that quite intimately, but I didn't realize that expanded into your department. And sometimes it's good to recognize that we just don't know what we don't know. So it's very useful information as well. And I see Councilor Gary's had his hand up for a while. Thank you.
Yeah, Councilor Gary?
I'll start by thirding the salvo of appreciation for you and your department. The time you give me to just listen and talk is invaluable, and I appreciate every second of it. My son and family and I also enjoy the hell out of the parks, and wanted to score the only AG double hockey stick of the budget meeting. So in this section, I did notice a fascinating report on your top 2 core services and maybe most importantly your bottom 2 core services as they shook out, and maybe a third of the bottom 2 of the 4 in there. And I wonder if it ought not to suggest bringing that to us to ask if we should still be offering any or some of those programs, maybe specifically the shower program. It seems also that at the bottom of the value of service we provide, yet a large majority of time, effort, and energy. And I know COVID tanked our ability to deliver that service, but I wonder if it wouldn't warrant you bringing that back to us in a manner to which we should run that through, if it's still an important thing we should offer or not. I think also some developments on how the community is, or at a county level, has been able to deliver that, whether it's even providing a service.
Excuse me.
Sorry.
The items that you're seeing in the priority services were the result of the exercise of putting the core services filter. We learned a lot going through that. I think, not to jump the gun on Jeff, but you're going to see some form of that calculator in the process we went through later. Is it this summer, Jeff?
Yes.
And so we will be able to explain how staff came up with this, and you all might tweak those dials a little bit, and we can certainly share that then. I think having the park development and volunteer opportunities at the front caused us all to look differently at how we resource things and how we fund things. And we'll see what you all think of that filter and how we applied it, and certainly we'll make adjustments to our priorities going forward. In particular, the MacPac is having conversations about rentals, as you know, and the ability for us to change from what we know as this community center with a large event venue of the gymnasium and what it takes to support that and maintain that is one of those things that we have to ask ourselves, is that a core service of ours to maintain that, or is it Parks and Rec, or is it something else? That's a very difficult conversation for this community to have, because people are so connected emotionally to that space, and seeing it for Christmas programs and using it for specific concerts, that part of this conversation is going to be a challenging one, I think.
Yeah, I think however it comes back, if it's through the MacPac, how we use that new space, or to continue to use these spaces in the interim, or both, I think it's a conversation worth having. I also don't doubt that it will be a painful faucet to turn off, but I think we also we've undercut the private industry's ability to offer event and rental spaces to a large swath of users, and thus it's thrown a lot of things out of balance. So I think that's a discussion worthy of having on both ends. I answered another one of my questions in what was that calculator tool that you did to create those, but it sounds like that's coming. And then the other one on this subject, or a little bit in this, and perhaps tying back to the confusion at the beginning on where that question should land, is I'm wondering when and if we can entertain a conversation around reorientation of parks maintenance, getting in some alignment with Susan's authority under parks and as director. I think it's worthy having a conversation. I have some questions around park maintenance and how we can get that fund and service level back up, and wonder if it wouldn't also warrant a discussion around where that should live and how and why.
I think that's a question to come. Okay.
Or Jeff, I don't know if Jeff wants to answer that. I don't know.
You want to answer it now?
Sure. So there's no magic about where parks maintenance lives or doesn't live from an organizational structure. The harsh reality is that when you look at the financial needs of the full general fund, parks maintenance has received cuts over the years, and we have had a difficult time building that resource back. It's not about where it lands in terms of an organizational structure or who the department director is. It's about how does it compete for discretionary and limited general fund dollars. We're not contemplating any structural change. We always are looking for ways to make sure we're better coordinated, more collaborative, more consultative in how we provide services in and around the organization and community.
Thank you.
I just want to comment. I understand that there could be a perception that moving that position or moving that authority under the parks director may seem like rearranging deck chairs, but I do think from a accountability standpoint, it does make a difference in terms of maintenance. And I don't think that we should contemplate that type of change without also giving Susan the resources that she would need to be successful. And whether that were moved or not, I think that whoever were to take on that responsibility would need the resources that they need to be successful. And I do understand why that loses out in times of scarce budget dollars. And when we get to that section, I would like to further discuss it, because I think with the drought that we're experiencing this year, parks maintenance becomes a little more important than in previous years.
Okay, are we ready to move on? Parks and Rec Aquatic Center, I think, 241 to 244. None?
Yeah, I think in aquatics, 241, did I read it right? The aquatic center revenue indicates a return to full normal. Is that the assumption?
Yes. Well, no. So one of the things that we had in the budget summary, I really appreciate the way Jennifer helped guide us through this. We, in all of our estimations for both revenue and expenditures, we really had to make a guess. And we tried to document when we made those guesses how we came to those numbers by saying we estimated 25% of 2019 numbers, and then 50%. And so in each of those revenue line items of fees, you should see something that relates it back to how we tried to make a guess. And Jennifer made sure that we included in our budget summary notes something that says we will likely have to adjust this for Parks and Rec, in particular, at some point in the year, because we have zero way of knowing at this point what's coming tomorrow, much less 9 months from now. So I would anticipate some budget updates, at least from Parks and Rec, and Jennifer obviously would be the lead on that for the other groups. But Jennifer, did I cover that concept way you anticipate it rolling out?
Yeah, absolutely. I just in any circumstance, we're budgeting well in advance of reality and what actually happens during the upcoming fiscal year. And given the extraordinary circumstance of life in the time of COVID and coming out of COVID, there just is more uncertainty. So it's likely that there will be supplemental budget processes that come up, and that's not a problem. And we will address financial needs and changes as they emerge and are needed. So yeah, perfect.
Well, now I have to confess something. We were supposed to be on admin Parks and Rec. So does anyone have anything for admin Parks and Recs? Okay. So dropping down, we're at 245 to 258. Oh no, I'm sorry, 259 to 271, which is community center. Anything for community center? Okay, kids on the block, 271 to 275. Anything for that?
I will.
Okay, Remy, go for it. And Zach, it looks like your hand's up. Go for it.
Go, Zach.
Oh, okay. KOB page 273. It says KOB may receive $40,000 as a sub-grantee from MSD's 21st Century Grant. Can you elaborate a little on that one?
Sure. That is something that has happened in the past. Frequently when the school district does receive that money, we put it in there as a placeholder because we do not know. I will tell you an update as of today, though, related to the KOB budget. We basically built this assuming that we could operate at full capacity if we needed to. And at the same time, we've still been working on the KOB changes that the council directed us probably about a year and a half ago, I think. To work with the school district in close partnership and see if there are options for other providers to be the on-site, on-school property provider of after-school care. Today, we released an RFP for that. We are working on a facility rental intergovernmental agreement with the school district, and we anticipate we have enough time to award or to enter into a contract with the provider by fall, by this coming fall. So that would mean our only role in KOB or in after school that's run out of school buildings is to administer that contract with the provider. And so this would be one of those sections of the budget that would change entirely.
Cool, good work. So still on 273, can you, maybe I just don't get it. The charges for services, registration fees for KOB goes from 158 to 135 to then 450, 450. What's?
Yep.
Yeah.
Good question.
Line it up.
That was the trajectory of increasing the fees that we had originally talked about to get us.
Right size. Okay.
Exactly. So that reflects, I think, the $2,400 a year collection, and we were at about 600. I think we went to about 1,000 the first year we brought that to you, and we had anticipated continuing to grow that. So that's why that looks like a big leap, but we have not implemented that. The other thing I will put on the table related to KOB is KOB Inc., which is a 501c3, still has money from the mayor's ball that we anticipate would still be used for scholarshiping. So there is a scholarship outside of the city budget and outside of the city purview. There is a nonprofit agency that still issues scholarshiping dollars for after school programs.
So what was the thought in leaving it at the 450?
We pretty much just carried KOB last year forward to KOB this year, or I should say this year to next year. There's been so many options for KOB to go that we just said, if we're gonna collect fees, we gotta get them up there to what an actual cost of service is, and kept it that way.
Oh, for sure. Got it, that makes sense. And then 275, line 8130-45, that Linfield work study thing, is that program still active and going?
We had 2 participants in it last year. They have reformatted that since it originally began, and they really are focusing more on-campus work study opportunities instead of off-campus. I think we may be one of the only few that is still allowed to qualify under that. The other reason why it's not as big as it has been in years past is the schedule for Linfield students changed at some point over the last few years, and it makes it more difficult for them to get to the school sites for the program times that KOB runs. So we saw that drop off a lot. If you looked at the historic trends of that, it would have been a lot higher 10, 15 years ago, and it's much lower now.
Cool, thank you.
I'm ready. My question is more of a philosophical one. Or it's not really philosophical, it's, anyways, what kind of data are you collecting as the KOB goes through these changes in terms of what populations are being served? And then, I think there was an additional, I'm confused about the last data point in terms of the changes in Linfield programming. I thought we really saw an effect with the KOB program just in the last year or two with the availability of students when there was a huge schedule shift at the university, then college. But I'm always willing to be wrong. But more importantly, I'm wondering what kind of data we're collecting. What do we know about who we're serving through KOB currently? Thank you.
During the KOB assessment, which started, I think, two and a half years ago, the consultant did do a look at who was getting served and how we were doing with our scholarships. And the reality of that, and I still remember the consultant team reporting this to the council, is their bottom line was KOB is a good program and people are being left out. Which was heartbreaking to us because we had worked so hard to keep it a reasonable cost. Their analysis showed us that by keeping everybody's fees artificially low, we were actually not helping those in most need. And so as an example, 2 people would come in to register for KOB. One would say, $625, that's so cheap, I can't believe it. The next person coming in would say, $625, there's no way I'm ever going to be able to make that. And so that's when we started working with the schools, and we distributed the scholarshiping by census data to say which schools have the most families in economic need and those furthest from opportunities. We're going to award percentage-wise scholarships based on that information. We don't track demographic information in our registration program. So the last time we did look at that was during the Oregon Ask assessment that we did. I don't know if the providers that we're working with will collect that, but the providers do collect more economic and financial information because they will open up their books to employment-related daycare federal funding. So they will collect at least some data related to that. Whether or not they'll share it with us, I don't know.
Thank you so much, Director Muir.
Okay, on to recreational sports. Page 276 to 289. Anyone with questions for that particular area? Seeing none. Senior Center, page 290 to page 304. Did we want to expand on that one at all? And then park maintenance, 305 to 319. There's already been some discussion about that. That's park maintenance. Seeing nothing. Library, 320.
I'm sorry. Is the Senior Center director, or I'm sorry, I don't have the correct title for Ann Lane's position at the tip of my tongue. Will that be a position that's held open currently?
Yes. The Senior Center manager position is currently being held open vacant as part of the savings that exercise that we went through. For clarity, the state still lists in the guidelines that senior centers, along with hookah bars, I don't know why those two uses are paired together, but hookah bars and senior centers are still required to stay closed no matter what risk category level a jurisdiction is in. I've asked about when that might be revisited. I have not heard that they will release it, but that is something that the community thinks that we are doing something to keep it closed, and every opportunity I can to say the state is actually requiring senior centers to stay closed. That's a good message for us to get out. We're trying. We would love to be open.
That's also good to know. The communications currently between what's allowed and what people think is allowed is very difficult communication. I can't imagine why you got lumped in with hookah bars, and I'm just disappointed in myself that I can't come up with a good joke for the moment. Thank you.
Senior centers and hookah bars, isn't that the same thing? There you go.
Okay, park maintenance, 305 to 319. Seeing none?
No.
Oh, there's Zach. And no, I don't see you, Sal, yet, but I do see.
Go ahead, Zach.
Mr. Renshaw, good to see you. A couple questions. Excuse me. Page 308, right off the bat, you talked about in tree maintenance. This work also includes the replacements of about 270 trees need to be programmed in the future because we're not going to do any. I think there was a budget line for no tree replacement, if I'm recalling correctly. I guess, is that, what is it normally? What is it out of line, and will we be able to get that back, or do we have plans to alter that in a non-financial manner?
Well, there's no really non-financial matter to do it. I mean, trees cost money. We do know now that we will be getting some FEMA money as a result of the federal disaster declaration. So some of those funds may be able to go to tree planting. Those trees would be planted over a series of years. We probably wouldn't try to plant 270 trees in 1 year. We'd probably do it in a programmed stage fashion. But the shorter answer is it's probably not this year, unless that FEMA money comes in. And as part of our planning, our work program for this upcoming year, we'll start programming those tree replacements into our plans and getting them into the budget as resources allow. So hopefully that answers your question on that.
That does a little, I think maybe if I find that line item, it would help me remember where we are historically. So let's try and circle back there to answer that. I think in this section, my main takeaway and request is to, and I know many years ago, before my time, the concerted effort of deferred maintenance was to save money, and this preamble references sort of those decisions and the, yet again, inability this year to recover from that, and we're still going to be on lower service levels. I'd love to see where those were. Is it time? How would we be able to get back to that level? Where would we be if we didn't cease those levels? I think it's a worthy endeavor to find out where we are now and to see what it would take to get back to, as we would, adequate service levels as it referenced in this budget that we aren't achieving.
Sure. Yeah, I do. And I understand the question you're asking. I wouldn't try to attempt to answer in this setting.
Oh, for sure.
Fairly in-depth analysis. Just a quick history for context. We sort of went through the same exercise in 2013. Different driver, of course, but we kind of re-gauged how we did park maintenance. And at that point, we set some service levels. And we've set service levels every year since I've been here, and probably long before that. But it wouldn't be a simple matter, but it would be a good exercise to go through and say, what are our preferred service levels versus our actual service levels? And probably a third category, what are our affordable service levels? Because oftentimes that becomes a reality. What we're dealing with is that we're all, we all wish our park system looked better, particularly right now. But at the end of the day, we're also part of a pretty broad suite of services that the city offers. And so we do the best we can with the resources that are allocated, and we make choices. And that's kind of what you're seeing on the ground this year. We've asked ourselves to make choices to try to balance the impacts of ice storms with the ongoing, so obviously springtime, early summer is a very busy time for our staff anyway. And of course, rolling in the goals of the furlough program. So there's lots of competing factors here. But I can't disagree that going back and looking at and doing some service level analysis and bringing that back to for review would be a good exercise to go through.
Yeah, I would like to request from staff that happen in the near term. I think it's a worthy endeavor to look at what it would take for multiple different levels of good, better, best, and how we could get back there. If it's time, and are we able to do that? Can we do that?
Yeah, I think the advantage of that is that what it does, it sets how do I want to phrase it? It kind of sets a pathway for when those resources are available, and then that's kind of what we keep in mind all the time anyway. What we want to be able to put ourselves in position so when the resources are available, we can say, yep, this is what we can do with these funds. And we've actually been pretty good about that, quite candidly. I think we've done a good job being able to explain what we can and can't do with the resources that we're given.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah, and I think I want to chime in here, and I'm not, last time in front of you, I guess, but, in defense of this team and this staff, it is a little bit disheartening to hear an implication that perhaps they're not delivering what they could. It's simply a matter of resources. When I took over as director in 2006, we had 235 acres of parks. We now have 278 acres. We had 8.13 full-time equivalent staff, and we now, in this year's budget, have 10.49. The resources have not grown to maintain these parks that have been added over time, and we continue to add parks. We're adding parks as part of the new development as part of Baker Creek North. And so this team does an incredible job maximizing the work that they do with the resources they're given, and the implication that somehow they're not delivering is disheartening to me. And hopefully that was not the intent of the earlier comments, but certainly this team is probably one of the most sophisticated groups as far as letting you know what it takes to deliver, how many hours we mow in each park, how much weeding we do, how much time it takes to maintain park equipment and do safety inspections. And so the work systems that they have in place have allowed us to adjust as we've been asked to do our work with less resources over time, and this team has delivered time and time again, and they've been transparent about it. These summaries that David puts in your budget year to year are very detailed and explain the choices we're making and why we're making them. So, I apologize if I'm out of line, but this team, I believe, is doing extremely high level of work on yeoman resources. And so I'll be quiet and answer any questions there might be.
No, Mike, if I may offer an immediate response, I think maybe perhaps question didn't land as it intended. It had no intent to say that the staff is falling down and hasn't done a great job. I could not agree more with you, and they've done a Herculean effort on limited resources, perhaps differently again, and I apologize if I gave the opposite indication that I felt otherwise. Perhaps differently phrased, my question would be, how do we get your department up in additional resources to grow, to meet the challenge we've continued to throw? And I only have read in here a couple of instances where it was made that we aren't doing that, or that those levels aren't there. And so my question is, can we look at models and methods and ways to get that department to be able to deliver that? What resources can we put in your toolkit? So I apologize if I gave the indication that my appreciation wasn't utmost for that department in their performance. Those are all the questions.
Kelly, you're on mute.
Remy, would you please ask your question?
Thank you. This is something that I talked to Director Muir. I talked to your predecessor, and I'm sorry if I'm directing this the wrong place. If I should be directing it to Mr. Renshaw, but this is years ago. I talked to Jay Pearson. I came on council, idealistic, looking at what surrounding cities were doing, and seeing that there was a cities, including nearby Corvallis, that that were letting some of their turf brown, not water, which then reverberated into the overall budget. It's not a popular decision, but it can be a decision that has obvious pitfalls, especially if you have young plantings that need watering. I've also heard concerns about safety in terms of exceptionally hard ground in sports arenas, etc. But then there are a lot of there's the flip side of that, of areas that need a lot of maintenance in terms of mowing, etc. And I'm wondering if there's been any internal discussion without any implication of positive or negative. I'm just wondering if there's been any internal discussion about letting some of our parks brown over the summer. And I would add in at this point, with the additional information that we know, that generally as a state we are water limited at this point. That our water table is low. Thank you.
So I'll jump in there real quick, ma'am. When we contemplated the idea of furloughs, we kind of took a hard look at service levels and said, okay, what's the impact are these furloughs going to have? And letting parks go brown is in fact one of those methods. And we've got a list in the budget summary, but specifically we're looking at smaller neighborhood parks, Bender River, Greenbrier, Village Mill, Kingwood, North Evans, those sorts of facilities, parts of our linear park system, parts of Lower City Park, parts of Kiwanis Park. And so those are areas that we won't turn the irrigation on in the beginning of the season. It doesn't help us a bunch, but as the season progresses, obviously then you've avoided the cost of having to set those systems up and monitor them. You've also avoided the mowing costs. We would not choose that sort of approach at an athletic facility like Dancer. That's a very heavily used turf stand, and quite honestly, it's a turf stand we're really pretty darn proud of. For the level of use that that turf gets, for the level of compaction that it's in, we would not want to monkey with that. We're pretty proud of the way it works. And you're right, it could wind up in safety implications. But yeah, it is a methodology that we chose as part of this particular year, and it's one we've used in the past. And specifically, we started doing that in 2013, and we did that for a couple of years as we moved through that process. So I hope that answered your question.
Thank you.
Okay, is that it? Any others, Remy? Mayor?
I just want to give kudos out to the group because I know of 3 incidences this year where we've had community groups come out and want to help. And working with your department to accomplish that, that takes quite a bit of effort on your part to get ready for a group of people come in. I know at Wortman Park and Discovery Meadows, we've had cleanup crews come in. I've had a lot of conversations with those groups. And so thank you, David and Mike, for allowing that to happen. I know sometimes large crowds can be kind of difficult, but that allows people to give back in an area that they have passion about, and that's our parks.
For sure, that's been a really useful resource to, during the storm cleanup. And we've had over 500 hours of volunteer work to support us, and more to come, for sure. So I appreciate that, sir.
Any other questions? Sal?
Yes, thank you, Chair Menke. The last few years, we have done a little bit of work with the Watershed Council to do some of the maintenance in parks. What's the plan, or how are we going to incorporate them into the work plan this year, Dave?
Pretty much the same approach, Sal. We've been in touch. Actually, Luke just sent out his update just the other day. They're starting their garlic mustard work here. They may have actually already started now, so I'm thinking about it. And so what we do is we partner with them. We give them some not direct staff support in terms of actual labor, but we'll give them staff support in helping them identify areas of infestation or hook them up with neighbors and those sorts of things. Occasionally we looked at kicking in some dollars towards our grant proposals. They've been a really, really good resource. I know we're tied into the Yamaha County's weed board. I know that they just finalized their new weed list this last week, I think.
Yeah, well, I appreciate that. I just want to say that, the grant program that they operate under OWEB is a 4-to-1, or excuse me, a 3-to-1 match. So every $5,000 that goes in, they get $15,000 in OWEB grants. And the last 2 budgets I've advocated for the city putting in $5,000 into that as an offset for that grant, because it'll get us back another 15 in that state grant, and I think could help address some of the issues that we have. They do a good job with very limited resources. The other point I want to make for this budget cycle is that we are in a 1,200-year drought this year, regionally. Willamette Valley is not quite as bad, but we're trending towards a significant loss of groundwater and drying, and we've already had fires actually in Dallas, grass fires. And so this year, I actually think that the maintenance of the, not only the parks, but some of the parklands that we own that would normally not be maintained might become more important just from a fire hazard standpoint, given that we're already in fire warning. And so this is one area where, although I don't like the idea of using ARP funds to backfill, operations, as we're heading into fire season, I do think that it might be worth it to invest a little bit more money in clearing out some of the tall grass from some of those outlying parks that normally would not get a treatment, especially in a tight budget environment. So I want to throw that out there. I want to throw out the idea that when this comes back to us, that maybe we find $5,000 to put towards a match for OWEB, and then secondarily that staff consider the fire risk that we're looking at this summer, and consider, putting a little bit of one-time funds towards addressing that risk.
Yes, sir.
No further questions. Let's see, where do we leave off here? I think we're to library, page 320 to 335. Any questions for library? Going once, going twice.
Member Harmon Ferry has her hand up, and
Yes,
Counselor Geary.
I can see Jeff.
Okay.
Debbie, please help yourself.
I'm new, so this is a total rookie question. But one question I had in reading it is, what is the difference between Friends of the Library and Library Foundation? I understand those aren't the city budget, but I'm trying to figure out what are those? And I guess then my second question, my follow-up question is, I saw there were a couple of things that I really appreciated, by the way, seeing what they wish they could do, but what they're cutting out. I think it was $1,000 for volunteer recognition, and there's a line item also on computers that they think they need, but they're not able to get, so they're cutting that out as well. I wondered if either of those projects would make sense for either Friends of the Library or Library Foundation. I, for one, would be happy to give money towards those projects. I'm identifying right up front if somebody approached me. So I'm wondering if there are others out there, if approached, that could fill those holes.
Thanks, Debbie. Good questions and not at all rookie questions. That question in terms of Friends and Foundation gets asked all the time. Originally, it would have been that the Library Foundation is more of a bequest, larger funds, building up funds and working just from the interest of those funds to some extent. And the Friends is more of a smaller funds, membership based, everyday type of programming and collections. That was the case until about 5 years or so ago, when someone did leave a large sum of money to the Friends of the Library. And then that ended up sort of, they often end up funding a lot of the same things, but really that was the original difference between the two groups. And you can see it more in the amount of dollars that are from the two groups. In terms of the, saying, oh, well, could they take on this or that? Both organizations fund the library and library programs in a number of different ways. Not all of those ways got into the budget document because not all of those funds are funneled through the city budget. They provide a huge amount of support for a variety of things. They also thankfully do a great job of hearing out my proposals to them to say, hey, this is a program that we'd really like to do. They also know that they're, I went to them to say, look, we're looking at these sorts of cuts. I'm probably going to be coming to you. And, one of the things, that would be great if those are the things, if they had to spend money on the volunteer appreciation, for instance, because I look at, and they look at, their role should be kind of the extras, the icing on the cake, the part that makes the library better and more excellent. And actually where their dollars have been going in the last many, many years is towards general collections, the borrowing collection, because again, the funding is just such that we need their dollars to keep up with the collection, the borrowing collection. So, they're putting $8,500 or more into just buying books and other materials, and another $10,000 to buying electronic resources. So yes, they might be able to and willing to put $1,000 also towards volunteer appreciation, but in some ways we're looking at even bigger projects that they put their dollars towards. So I hope that, so yes, they're doing a lot, and I just had that recent thought too about the volunteer appreciation as maybe one of the things that makes sense to have the Friends put money towards, but they're also funding a lot of other kind of almost more basic services that serve the community overall.
Councilor Gary, do you have a question?
Yes, thanks. Jenny, thank you also for this year of library activities during the COVID pandemic. The shift to being able to deliver your services without being able to open your doors was not only a tremendous challenge, but you guys handled it with great success. So thank you for still getting books out into the community. Also on the subject of sort of the Friends and the Library Foundation, just reading it, I know that their invaluable support wouldn't allow us to do what we can do at the level we do, but to see it written on page 321 to the tune of $8,000 and nearly $32,000 with the caveat that it's likely to increase due to the cuts this year, it's just another huge thank you to those organizations, and please pass that along. And a little bit on that subject, on page 322, under budget challenges, at the very end, you say the library has still not recovered the cuts to the book budget from 2012, and then the Library and Foundation and the Friends stepped up to help that. We're still not at that level. I see going to the budget, it's split out into adult books, children's books, and a handful of others. Adult books to the tune of roughly 20,000, children's to the tune of roughly 15, and then some others. But if we were to get back to that level and then chart out from parity there, what is that gap now, and how would we be able to get back to that?
I'm not sure I follow the question.
So you referenced that in about 2012 we cut the book purchasing budget, and the Friends stepped in. And we're now at the roughly 20,000 and 15,000 for children and adults and other things. What was it in 2012? What was our book buying budget in 2012? And if we didn't cut it then and continued on its growth pattern, what would it be at now? And how would we be able to get back to that?
So I can't answer that question the way that you have put it forth, but I can say that at the time in 2012, both organizations stepped forward and said that they would commit $8,500 each for the budget to make up for the cuts that needed to be made. So basically $17,000. And so those dollars are going to the collection currently to buy. I always try and be clear because collection means different things to different people. When I say collection, I'm referring to the borrowing collection of the library. So $17,000 going to that collection. That has remained the case. That, the intention was not originally that they would continue to put forth that amount of money. It has remained that they have put forth that amount of money, and now this year they will likely put forth even more than that amount of money. So there has been an increase in the city budget for collections up to, not a lot, but up to this point, and that Friends and Foundation dollars have stayed at the 17,000 instead of decreasing. And then the other thing that I always like to point out that a library 20 years ago had to buy a book. Now they have to buy a book in large print and a book in regular print and a book on CD and a streaming audiobook and an ebook, and then likely a movie if it's popular, and maybe a graphic novel if it's really popular. So all of a sudden what was once you bought a book is now you have to buy almost 8 different formats, which is great and really exciting, but it's what the things that can and should be available at a library have grown exponentially.
That last little bit makes sense, and then the answer to that question makes sense. So I'd love to be able to get back to a capacity where we could provide that gap again. So
yes. So would I. So would the Friends and Foundation. We'll see, maybe someday. And I also do feel like it's important for me to point out that while the budget summary shows the Friends contributing $8,000, they contribute a significant amount more than that. That is the amount that is run through the city funds. They contribute $6,000 for programming for the community, and then they also last year contributed $10,000 in ebooks, and will probably do something similar this year.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Jenny. All right, I don't see any other hands on this particular area, so we're going to go to pages 336 to 348, which is general fund non-departmental. Does anyone have questions on that? Okay, special assessment fund, 349 to page 355.
Kelly, I have some questions on that last part.
General fund
Question on that last part.
general fund non-denominational. Okay, just a minute.
Yeah.
I'm going to take a 2-minute break and ask all the questions you want in 2 minutes, Adam.
Okay, so go ahead and start asking questions. Most of my questions come from licensing permits and franchise fees and things like that. There's some pretty big jumps as well as some decreases on different line items. The first two, it looks like 420506 and 420507 generally are going down by 17%. And I was just wondering what the fluctuation for that is. Whereas the frontier line's jumping by about 12%, and then the marijuana local tax at 3% is jumping by 48%, while the cigarette tax is going down by 36%, when I know that cigarette tax increase just passed last November election. I know the big drop in the Oregon State marijuana taxes, that 4755 line would likely be due to Measure 110 that passed, but I was just wondering if Jennifer or Jeff could speak to kind of why we're seeing so much fluctuation in those numbers.
Yeah, I can run through that real quickly. There actually are kind of different factors at work for each of them. So let's see. I think the first you mentioned were some of the franchise fees. And so this is where looking at actuals instead of what we've budgeted comes into play. So for example, the 4205-07, the Frontier. So if you look at 2020 actuals, it came in at lower than 30, but we've historically been budgeting a little higher. And so when I went back and looked at the trends, I applied the trend line to what we had gotten in through, I think, the second payment of the current year. And so that's the trajectory we're on. But we have gotten, since the budget was published, another quarterly payment. And so I am looking at that to make sure that we're on track both for 2021 and if I think the revenues actually have popped up, and I suspect it has to do with finally a COVID pop with internet service provider revenue. We're probably now beginning to see that. So I actually think the revenue is going to rebound a little bit in the same way that liquor got a pop during COVID, right?
Yeah, totally.
So I'm looking at that number specifically to potentially make a revision in the very final version that comes before you at the end of June. Then the local marijuana tax, again, it's just the volatility on this, it's just been, the trend is huge, and it's a new market, right? And so it isn't stabilized. So this was what kind of the trend level led me to believe we're looking at, but with every subsequent quarter of getting information, we'll be able to refine that and have better projections as time goes on, right?
That doesn't have anything to do with the potential of Senate Bill 8864, though, that you emailed out today.
No, it doesn't. I've been following moving in the House and the Senate and hoping that flexibility might come into play. But no, that is not, I have not assumed anything beyond a 3% now.
Okay, thank you. And then that big drop on 4755, that's just related to Measure 110.
Yes, exactly. We, that, as well as you mentioned the cigarette tax, we took what the League of Oregon Cities, the LOC, their projections of state shared revenues and followed their guidance in terms of how they were seeing those trajectories over the next several years. So I utilized what they were saying as, I mean, they know better than I how all of this seems to be playing out. So.
Thank you.
Sure.
Any other questions, Adam? You done? Okay. Sal, did you have a question?
Oh, I just wanted to confirm. So the Measure 110 did not touch that portion of the marijuana tax. Only, can you explain to me what portions of that tax that measure touched, Jennifer?
Yeah, Measure 110 exclusively touches our share of state recreational marijuana tax. It does not affect our own local tax collection. So our local marijuana tax is going up pretty substantially just based on what the usage seems to signal. But we really had to pull back on the state. And again, it's still, somewhat guesswork in terms of what the impacts will be of that on city and county shares of that revenue stream. Jeff, are you going to say something? Did I hear you?
Oh, I'm good.
Okay.
Yep. Go ahead.
No, I'm good. Jennifer handled all that.
Okay, great. So now we are going to move to Special Assessment Fund 349 to 355. Going once, going twice. The TLT Fund, Transient Lodging Tax, 356 to 362.
Actually, I'm sorry, Kelly. Can I jump in, even though I'm not in the budget committee? So for Fund 05, so this fund actually is doing two things. It's tracking the special assessment that we do with the Downtown Association, but we have also utilized it historically for some federal grants, and the CBDG grant is in there this year. And this is where the staff proposal that I proposed that we put the American Rescue Act dollars in 05 so that it will be much easier. It's such a small, the fund is so much smaller than the general fund, and I don't want to create a new fund till we understand things better. So I'm proposing that that's where the $7 million would go, so people could really see it.
It'll pop right out next year.
It sure will.
Okay. All right. Moving on to TLT, again, 356 to 362. No questions. Telecommunications.
I have a quick one, Kelly.
363 to 369. Okay.
On the TLT, it looks like we're budgeting about 96% of what we got in 2019, and that just seems kind of aggressive given still dealing with COVID and tourism and whatnot. So I was just curious how we're so confident that we're going to get that.
They're going to be doing a budget presentation.
So
they're going to be doing a budget presentation at our next
Tuesday.
Right. So that will be the presentation that Visit McMinnville makes regarding their work plan and how they intend to spend the budget. But I think it would be useful for the budget committee to hear how we have actually seen collections through the course of this year, what current bookings are looking like in the quarter that just started, and how that informs the trend that we put in this budget. So I'd go ahead and defer to Jennifer on the details.
Yeah, so this is a really interesting and surprising case, to be frank. So every quarter we get a new data set, right, from all of the payers. And last quarter that we will be turning to Visit McMinnville actually the check went out this week. The bookings and the tax revenue were higher than my forecasts. So I'm taking a new look at the number both for the FY21. So I think I will be submitting a supplemental budget for the current fiscal year to raise the number, because we're going to need to turn over more money than we had budgeted in FY21. And I'm also going to reproject through FY22, and hearing the latest intel on bookings levels, just starting now, things are popping back higher than I anticipated, because I share your initial thought, Councilor Garvin. When I first ran the numbers, I was like, wow, there's no way they're going to approach 2019. But that's what the data supported, so that's what we went ahead and included in the budget. But actual data seems to indicate that it's even better than that. So,
and Adam, just to give you insight, today we had a Visit McMinnville, and they're growing at a tremendous rate. The reservations aren't out 2 or 3 months, but they're coming in steady in a shorter period of time. So long term, they're very optimistic, but long term, typically for the summer months, they'd have bookings out months now, and it's only 1 month people are waiting and seeing, but it's a very high level.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions on TLT? Anyone? All right.
This is just an anecdotal comment. We are experiencing tremendous hiring problems within the service industry, and so we're very aware of the level of reservations that are going that are coming in, and everybody is trying to staff up for this. And I don't typically like to pull my business experience into any council meetings, but I will tell you that even though now we are able to be more open than ever, we are actually looking at closing a couple days a week because it's impossible to staff right now. So I feel like anecdotal, I'm not trying to be a Cassandra by any means. No offense to anybody with the name, it's a great name, but it does carry some weight. So so I'm not trying to be negative in any sort, but I do think that it's important that we keep that in mind as well. Everybody is going to do everything they can to stay open, but even though the demand is there, there is a limited ability to meet that demand, and I know we're talking about TLT funds, which have to do with lodging, but lodging then correlates back to the rest of the service and tourism economy. And I think it's very important to highlight that these struggles aren't something that we're just reading about in the paper and that they're not removed. These are exceptionally real, and so these, again, I think these are numbers that we need to be aware of. Yes, there's tremendous demand. The demand is coming in. It's strong. There's a lot of it, and we need to be conscientious that there is still a vulnerability as we move forward. And not that that should dictate our decision making, but it should be in our consciousness. Thank you for the additional time.
And Remy, just to share, that's the same sentiment that was talked about today from the food and beverage and the impact that has on the bookings down the road for our motels. Having the appropriate number of individuals to run beverage and restaurants are really hurting in those higher level tourism types of entities in the downtown area.
Zach.
I'm going to wait till we close this section and wonder if I can ask a question before we open the next section. So
I think we're there, Zach.
Oh, excellent. I was just wondering if we should do a gut check, given that we have 200 pages left and we have the schedule reserved for another day, if we could see what the temperature is for finishing this on the scheduled second day. We have, 200 pages left and then rousing discussion overall, but.
Yeah, it is nearing 10 o'clock. I'm not sure how wise everyone is after 10, so.
Go ahead.
I vote for Monday too.
You move for meeting 2?
Yes, please.
How many would like to defer for another meeting or go one more meeting?
I would. Carrie, second meeting.
Okay, it's looking to me like we've got kind of a general consensus there. Can we cut off here at TLT and pick it up on the 24th? Is that what the date?
I do note that Wendy Phoenix has her hand raised. I don't know if she's
Wendy,
voting for an extra meeting or has a comment.
Or you want to talk?
I was voting. No, just voting.
All right, very good.
Desperately voting.
Yes, it is Monday. I believe that is the 24th at 6 is when the meeting is noticed for.
That's correct.
Okay, so does everybody feel this way? Is there any dissenters or feeling?
Chair, maybe we could do a motion in a second, particularly because the URA budget also has a public hearing established with it. So the motion would be to continue the meeting to the Monday scheduled time.
So moved.
Okay, do I have Chris moved, and who seconded?
Second.
The mayor, okay.
So I just want to be clear that we moved both this meeting and the URA meeting to Monday?
Yes, that's correct, because we're not getting the URA.
In the meantime, you can all buy me a drink.
Okay, Claudia, would you mind polling the group, the budget committee, by name, so we have this formally done?
Committee Member Haas.
I vote to delay it.
To Monday?
Yes.
Perfect. Councilor Garvin?
Aye.
Committee Member Hart?
Yes.
Councilor Geary?
Yes.
Committee Member Hofstadter?
Yes.
Councilor Chenoweth?
Yes.
Committee Member Sealer?
Shyla, yes.
Councilor Peralta?
Aye.
Committee Member Phoenix?
Yes.
Council President Drapkin?
Bitterly, because I drank coffee at 5:30, fully anticipating that we should go until at least 11:30 or maybe midnight. But
no.
Hey, throw a no out.
I will say I consent and then I'll stay up alone for another couple hours.
Committee Member Harmon Ferry?
Thank you for your sacrifice.
Yes, I will go home and drink wine to counter Remy's caffeine.
Committee Member Maxfield?
Yes.
Mayor Hill?
Yes.
And Chair Minke?
Yes. So I would say it's unanimous from what I hear.
Correct.
All right. Gosh, we'll see everybody Monday.
See you on Monday.
Thank you, Zach.
Thanks, everyone. Great
Thank
question.
you.
Right, very
Thank you,
interesting.
Zach.